like to, if you could call the roll, and then we'll have pledge allegiance.
Of course. Ms. Shatmeyer?
Here.
Mr. Sullivan?
Here.
Ms. Cavanis? Here. Mr. Parker?
Here.
Ms. Smith? Here. Mr. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Knudsen?
Here.
Ms. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Shoemaker?
Here.
And Chair Drudy.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Craig, do you want to lead the pledge allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item on our agenda is public comment. Members of the public are welcome to comment. Do we have any public comment? Okay, not seeing, we'll go to the consent calendar, and on there we have the minutes of October 18th, the October 17th retirement report, and the monthly preliminary financial report. Any items for discussion, or is there a motion to approve?
Move approval of the consent calendar, Mr. Chair.
I'll second.
I guess we could just,
Without objection.
without objection, approve the
By
consent
unanimous
calendar.
consent, the consent agenda is approved, if you so wish it.
Okay. Then we're on to item number 2, which is discussion and possible action regarding any consent. Well, we just do that in separate action. We just did that. 3 is discussion and possible action regarding the June 30th, 2017 actuarial valuation submitted by Siegel.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Andy Young with Siegel Consulting. I'm joined by my colleague, Dirk Anderson. In front of you is our valuation as of June 30, 2017. So I'm going to go with the low-tech way, present from the hard copy of the valuation report. If I may ask you to take a look at the cover letter of the report. In this report, we have provided to you in the first paragraph the contribution rate that we are recommending for the upcoming 2018 and 19 fiscal year. So that would be the contribution rate for not just covering the employer, but as well as the members, covering the general, the safety, and the probation tiers. And once these rates are approved by the board, I expect them to be presented again to the Board of Supervisors for their review and adoption before they will become effective in a couple of months. In the section 1 of the report, if you look at page I, a lot of the text that you can see in the front of the top section of the report are very much boilerplate. With this valuation, we have taken the assumptions that were previously approved by the board as a review of the triennial experience study in April of this year. So some of the assumptions that receive a lot of attention, and rightly so, for example, are the interest rate return assumption, inflation assumption, and how long our retirees live after they retire from the plan. So all those assumptions, according to the funding policy of the board, are reviewed once every 3 years. So we did this in 2017, April 2017. So what we expect to have happen is these assumptions will be applied definitely in the first valuation in 2017. They will be carried over to the 2018 and then on to the 2019 valuation, unless the board chooses to review them on an interim basis before the 3 years down the road. If you look at the very bottom of page I, so this is one of the important elements of your actuarial funding policy. And by the way, as I go through the report, please feel free to stop me if you want to ask me a question, or if something is not there, or maybe it's not covered by my presentation. At the bottom of this page, we try to describe what is the period that would be used to pay off the unfunded liability of the plan, so the so-called amortization policy. Now, if you look at the left-hand margin, you can see some references. Now, actually, I would like you to turn to page 47 and then 48 of the report for me. Just want to give you an idea of what is provided in those detailed rate changes, which I won't cover, by the way, in a lot of detail during this presentation. But the question always gets asked, and again, I will volunteer that for the board, is we have an unfunded liability in the plan. How would that be paid for over the next several years? And at what point in time would the plan have assets to cover the liability? So again, we are not giving you the answer right as of yet as to what contribution rates would be required to pay off those UAAM. But if you look at page 47, you can see how the unfunded actuarial accrued liability actually serviced in what year and because of what reasons. So for example, if you look on the top of page 47, you can see that for the general plan, there was an effort to combine the amortization bases back in 2012. So you can see that back then, when and that was right about the time when Segal was first retained by your board to service as your actuarial consultant. For the general plan, there was a base of $96 million that was created. Since that time, definitely the county has been making contributions. As a matter of fact, the county has been making contributions towards that unfunded liability for the past 5 years. But then you can say, well, wait a second, it looks like the outstanding balance, which is the balance remaining in that layer, was $102 million. So how come the county would have been making contributions for the last 5 years, but yet we have an unfunded liability which is greater than where we start? And so this has to do with the so-called negative amortization. The way we amortize and pay off the unfunded liability is as a level percentage of payroll, assuming payroll will grow at the rate of 3.5%, for example. So in the first several years of this amortization period, even though contributions are made by the county towards the unfunded liability, but the payment that they make is less than the interest. So I know there's a little bit more detail. We covered that as part of the actuarial funding policy, but I still like the board to be reminded that we do have some negative unfunded liability or negative interest that is being paid for the last.
So Andy, can I ask you?
Yes.
So I thought you just said that that assumption in 2012 was that the payroll growth would be 3.5%. So if payroll growth wasn't 3.5%, what happened with the results?
If payroll growth were not to be 3.5%, then you could potentially not have serviced the debt, not have serviced the payment to the unfunded liability. However, there was remedy that was mitigated several years ago when the board looked at the funding policy, and one of the important elements of that funding policy is we would charge the employer the greater of what is required to pay off the unfunded liability as a percent of payroll or the actual dollar amount. So in other words, from the last several years, pay attention to the annual payment amount. Whatever we said is the annual payment, in taking the first amortization layer as an example, there's a need to collect $6.6 million. So to the extent that the county's payroll did not grow as much as what we expect, we would nonetheless charge the county an amount to pay off that unfunded liability.
So the full payment was made regardless of whether the payroll grew by 3.5%?
Exactly, that
Okay.
would be the case. Yes.
When you're talking about the negative amortization, I didn't see the reports, like the 1 or 2 page report that I think would really help explain that to, especially the new people on the board. That really makes that very clear.
Mhm.
Was that something we're gonna get at a later date?
The amortization schedule.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
we always get that.
We got like
After the fact.
maybe next month or the month after?
Exactly,
Okay.
that's right. So
Okay.
in other words, Sherry, you're right that every year after the board approved the valuation report, we always send you kind of like a reminder as an informational item, given the unfunded liability, not just for the general plan, but for the 3 plans together combined with the association as a whole. How much contributions is being paid to service the debt of the unfunded liability, and how much interest are you paying, how much principal are you paying, so you would not be surprised when you see that schedule that at least in the next several years, there's negative principal, meaning that the amount of payment towards the unfunded liability is actually somewhat less than the interest, but you will get that as an information item.
Good, thank you.
Absolutely. Now, the one place where I do like you to pay attention to is actually on page 48. So rather than to go through the general, the safety, and probation plan, I'd like you to look at the total plan. So this is the 3 plans combined. Now, if you look at where we were at in 2012, so back then, because there was a restart of the amortization layer, we were a system where in 2012, only like 5 years ago, we have an unfunded liability of about $126 million. Now, if you look at the total unfunded liability, which will go into excruciating detail for the rest of the presentation, but if you look at the total at the bottom of this page, it's $204 million. So we went from $126 million in unfunded liability, which is the first layer, to 204. Now, the reason why that came about, and again, the best source I can turn you to will be the document that James and your staff has put together. This is the evolution or the reconciliation of the unfunded liability. But make no mistake, during the last several years, we, at the advice of the actuary Segal, we have asked and we have granted our request to actually tighten up the actuarial assumptions. So for example, take a look at 2014. There was a new layer that was created, equal to $58 million. So about the middle of the page, middle of the columns under the total base column. And then again, in 2017, which is the reason why the contribution rate in this valuation is going up, there's another tightening up of the actuarial assumption, namely the investment return assumption. Another reason why the unfunded liability has grown by $28 million. So if you take a look at the original unfunded liability back about 5, 6, 7 years ago, 126, you add the assumption change of 58 from 2014, you add the assumption change from 2017, that is why the unfunded liability of this system has grown from about 126 only 5 years ago from where it is at today.
Can you give me an example of what the change in assumption might cover?
Yeah, it's primarily, Kathy, the interest rate assumption. Because I still remember we do an experience, a so-called experience study for the association every year. By the experience study, we look at all the actuarial assumptions that we use to predict how long our active members work for the county, retire from the system, and how long they will stay as a retiree collect a pension. We also anticipate or predict what kind of rate of return we would have on the investments, on the roughly $500 million in investment we have. So that's the interest rate assumption. Now, the two assumptions that have the most important impact on the pension fund like ours would be number one, first and foremost, the investment return assumption. So the investment return assumption has come down quite a bit. During our watch, at one time it was 7.75%, it came down to 7.25, and then it comes down to 7%, again, as a result of the last experience study. So that is by far the most important. The other factor which is very important, is good for the retirees, but not necessarily means, at least financially positive for the employer. That has to do with how long our retirees are expected to live after their retirement. So time after time, it's been demonstrated that our retirees are living longer, so that's good, great news. But that means that we have to continue to put more money aside as those life expectancy improve to anticipate those longer payout after their retirement. So it's really a combination of interest rate assumption as well as life expectancy, how long our retirees live. Even though in the experience study we look at all the assumptions used to anticipate the rate of contribution that would be required to substantiate their retirement benefit, but by far the two assumptions that are the most important impact would be the interest rate and the mortality rate.
If I may, Mr. Chairman. Andy, I want to add to your comments about the 14 and the experience study from 2014 to 2017. And remind the board there was also an experience study in 2011 where the board lowered its assumed rate of return from 8% to 7.75. So with the changes that took effect in 2011, 2014, and the 2017 experience studies, those assumption changes added to our unfunded liability in the total of just over $105 million. So that's, it's not in the Siegel report because they weren't our actuary at the time, but I wanted to add that to what you were saying about these other changes. So.
One more question on that. So I know that there was discussion, because I talked to some of you, about the 7.25 to 7, that was a decision that this board made. So is the board involved in any of these other decisions about life expectancy and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Oh.
that's
We don't actually do the calculation, but yeah.
right. Yes.
Okay, so a recommendation comes
From the
there.
actuary.
That's right, that's right. And yes, so every time, every 3 years, when we kind of kick the tires, make sure that all the assumptions are appropriate, we always provide a formal recommendation to this body, the retirement board. We talk about a lot of the assumptions. Rightly so, the interest rate is by far the one which received the highest level of attention, but we nonetheless also go through life expectancy, retirement rates, etc., to make sure that the board is comfortable that those are valid and appropriate assumptions.
And that was done in April of 17.
Exactly. That's right. Now again, I apologize for spending so much time on these two first pages because, again, rightly so, these are the 2 pages that has in the past received all the attention of the board, and I think that's the reason why I want to volunteer that information to you so that we know we never try to hide anything from the board or the public for that matter. So with that as a backdrop, let's go back to section 1. So now I would go through page double I, Roman numeral 2. As I was alluding to, there was an experience study That CEQA presented and the board approved our recommendations to two very important changes in the assumptions and repeated on Roman numeral 2, double I on section 1 are those two assumptions, namely that the investment return assumption has come down from 7.25 to 7%. The mortality assumption is also being improved to anticipate longer life expectancies among our retiree members and beneficiaries. So in the evaluation, so moving on to the second bullet point, the question has always been asked, okay, so do we have enough assets in the plan to cover the so-called actuarial accrued liability? So these are the liabilities. For example, if I were to be a retired member of the retirement system, then I've already put in all the service, either for the county or for the two other participating special district employers. So all of my benefits have already been earned, so that's the so-called actuarial accrued liability. However, if I were to be one of your active employees, I've just been hired, for example, by the county yesterday, so I still have a lot of years of productive years to put in the county. So for me, I don't have anything accrued yet because I have yet to put in any service. But if I have been with the county for the last 10 years, I'm expected to work another 10 years for the county, then my pension benefit is almost 50% accrued because I take a look at how many years of service I've already put in, divided by the total service I'm expected to put in. So the question is always asked, relative to the amount of liability that I've already accrued, how much assets do we have to cover that liability? So the answer to that question is, if we measure the ratio of liability to assets to liability, that was about 70%, 70.7%. So again, the question could be asked, okay, have we been making progress, knowing that we always would like to have a 100% funding ratio? And so in order to answer that question, so we will go back to the body of the report and see how progress we make towards that unfunded liability, or the and that will be provided on page 22. So this is the place where you can see how that so-called funded status and the related unfunded actuarial accrued liability has changed over time. So as I mentioned early on, for 2017, we have roughly 70 cents of assets. The funded ratio is about 69.9%. So then if you ask, okay, well, what has been the progress that have been made towards the funded status or the unfunded liability, then you would have to go back up from the 69.9 all the way to, in this case, we have about 10 years of history for you, and so it was at 94.5%. So again, the same question could be asked, so wait a second, the county has been making contribution to pay off the unfunded liability, but yet, from 2008 to 2017, it looks like there's negative progress, right? Because we used to be at a place where for every dollar worth of liability, we have 95 cents of assets to cover their liability. So this question can be answered basically by the same observation we have made on the amortization schedule. Because remember I said, under our watch, we have made recommendations to change assumption 3 times. One time we were at a 7.75% interest rate, we lowered that to 7.25, and then we lowered that again to 7%. Now, anytime you change those assumptions, especially for interest rate, even though you're paying the same benefit payments to our retirees, but with the way interest works is, the lower the discount rate, the higher the present value of their liability is today. So the same story that was told on the addition to the unfunded liability, which makes the plan become less and less well-funded, can be used to explain the erosion of the funded status. Because every time we remeasure the same benefit payment streams using a more conservative, relatively more conservative set of assumptions, there's going to be an increase in the unfunded UAAL, unfunded actuarial accrued liability, and a reduction in the funded status. So they go kind of hand in hand. So that is, again, the reason why if you got stopped on the street and somebody asks, I heard that you're on the retirement board, explain to me why the funded status has not improved over time. It's really because we have been tightening up the actuarial assumption. So these are unfunded liability that we consciously have put on the books because we decided that it is time to measure the liability using more conservative assumptions.
What is the value of the last column, the UAAL, as a percentage of covered payroll?
I think it's a sense of scale as to what kind of resources, what kind of payroll do we have to measure that unfunded to compare that against the unfunded liability. I think that's the best answer I can come up with, other than the fact that this is a required disclosure. This is something that the so-called governmental financial office, GFOA, is requiring it actually to put in as part of the disclosure. So it's really a measure of how much unfunded liability you have relative to the payroll that will eventually be used to service that unfunded liability and the required disclosure.
But the unfunded liability is not serviced by payroll, it is serviced by the county, not by employee contributions.
Oh,
Well, yeah, employer and employee contributions.
Right, so it's only employer contributions to go to unfunded liability.
That is
though.
true too.
So I guess that's why I asked, what's the value of knowing what your payroll is if my employees aren't on the hook for that unfunded liability, and only I?
Yeah, it's
Just a requirement of the
is a
state.
requirement.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a requirement.
Catherine?
no, it kind of answered my question in that discussion, or what I wanted to add, is that whenever the discount rate is lowered, it requires the employer and the employee to pay more into the retirement fund.
But that's for future,
yes.
yeah, not in past.
So with that, let's go back to page I, in row 2. So we look at the unfunded actuarial, the true liability. By the way, because we don't use market value of assets for setting the funding contribution rate requirements, the so-called smooth or actuarial value of assets. So the basic concept is, if we were to determine the contribution rate for the county towards the unfunded liability using market value, we know that it has a tendency to go, market return anyway, have a tendency to go up in 1 year and then to go down the following year. So this is a great year for us to present this valuation, because if we were to use market value of assets, the rate of return, as you have already find out, is very close to 16% of payroll. So we love to be able to come over and present this kind of valuation every year. But that's not necessarily the case, because I remember we were here just 2 years ago, or maybe last year, when the rate of return was less than the expected, or the assumed rate back in 2016 valuation. So we learned the lesson that if we were to use market value of assets to set a contribution rate, we could ride the market value roller coaster. So for that reason, we are very comfortable, continue comfortable, to recommend and use smooth value of assets for the valuation. But the critics of the methodology will always say, well, if you were to not use market value of assets, how could we be able to find out how much market losses or market gains you have yet to include or will be including in the next several years? So for that reason, we have also been providing as an informational item what would be the funded status would be if we were to use market value of assets, at least to compare it against the liability. Now for this year, because we are sitting on some deferred gains, market gains that we have not recognized, the funded ratio is 71.2%. So on a smooth value basis, because we have not yet recognized all the market gains, the ratio is somewhat lower, it's 69.9. But if we were to use the market value, at least as an informational item, go ahead and recognize all the market gains, the funded ratio is slightly better at 71.2%. So we have been talking about the unfunded liability. We know that over time it has gone up because of the changes in the actuarial assumptions. However, what has been the experience for the plan over a shorter window from 2016 to 2017, that unfunded liability has gone up from about $185 million to $204 million that we have in this valuation report. So let's take a look at page 46 of the report and try to find out why the unfunded actuarial accrued liability has gone up between 2016 to 2017. So I'm now looking at page 46, which is in section 3 of the report. As I mentioned early on, at the beginning of the year, the unfunded liability of the plan was about $185 million. So if we ask the question, well, what if all the actuarial assumptions were to be met? Forget about the fact that we have changed the actuarial assumption, for example, interest rate or the mortality. How much in unfunded liability would we expect the plan to have at the end of this year if all the actuarial assumptions were to be met. So in order to answer that question, we have to add in the so-called normal cost. So this is the cost for 1 additional years of service credit that would be put in, that have been put in by our active employees. We would subtract off from that the employer and employee contributions that are expected to be made during the 2016 and 17 year. And of course, we have to adjust everything with interest. The expected unfunded liability would have actually come in a little bit higher, 185.5 million, relative to where we were at the beginning of the year. And again, this has to do with the fact that even though the county has been making contributions to pay off the unfunded liability, but at least based on this year's valuation, the interest that cost that we would charge the county is higher than the contribution that they pay towards the unfunded liability. So this again has to do with the fact that the original layer of the unfunded liability is amortized over a period which is relatively long. Our calculation is that it would take another couple more years when that amortization period drops to about 18 years. That is when any payment that they made towards the unfunded liability would at least pay off the interest and leave some amount over to pay off the principal. Which, by the way, was one of the reasons why when the board deliberated on the elements of the actuarial funding policy, a decision was made by this body to lower and to reduce the amortization period to 18 years from that point on out for any other gains and losses or for any change in the assumptions, with the intent that any time the payment is made, there would at least be sufficient payment to pay down the unfunded liability plus all the interest that would be required. So in any event, we still had a little bit of a negative amortization, and that's the reason why the amount of the UAAL has inched up a little bit from about 185.2 million to 185.5 million.
This is based upon our smooth rate of return, or?
Yeah, this
the
is still
actual
based on the smooth rate of return, right. Now,
So in fact, it should be much better than this year.
Exactly, and that's the reason why if we look at item 6A, because we have a great year for 2016-17, so even though under the asset smoothing method, we would recognize only 1/5 of the great news that we have during 2016-17, but nonetheless, we still have a market gain that we can account for, and that's the reason why there's a positive impact, because it reduced the unfunded liability, as you can see in line item 6A, in the tune of about $5.3 million. So that's a positive, and that is, of course, a reduction in the unfunded liability, which is positive. So going in the same kind of a direction, if you take a look at the salary experience, so these are the salary increases that our active continuing general safety and probation members received during the course of 2016 and 17. There's also a reduction in the unfunded liability of about $3 million. Now, I have to always remind the board it works both ways, because anytime salary increases for our active employees come in less than expected, that is great news for the retirement fund, but of course that means that the employees are not getting the long-term salary increase that we have anticipated or built into the assumption. So it kind of both ways, just very similar to one of the items that we have. For example, if you look at item 6D, so this is gain or loss from lower than expected COLA that has been granted to our retirees. So again, anytime, as you may be aware, under the county retirement law, our employees, our retirees will be entitled to up to a 3% annual cost of living adjustment. So this is an increase that you can grant for starting April 1st of every year. But to the extent that there was actual increase in prices of goods and services, if CPI were to come in greater than or equal to 3%, then you can grant a COLA of up to 3%. However, the COLA for the Bay Area and the Western region of the United States, which is the index we use, have come in less than the 3% during 2016-2017. Again, it's good news for the retirement plan, so that means that based on the assumptions that we've used to determine the COLA increases and the contribution rate requirements, we think that the retirees are going to get 3%, but in actuality, the increase has come in less than the 3%. So they have served to reduce the unfunded liability of the plan. But of course, if you look at that from the angle of the retired members, then they thought that they hope that they would get the 3%, but they did not materialize. But in any event, both of these events, the salary increases coming in less than expected and the COLA increases coming in less than expected, have served to reduce the unfunded liability of the plan in a total of about $5 to $6 million.
Question. I understand the Board of Suits makes the decisions about the salary increases. Is that also true about the COLA amount? Is it automatically tied to some index, or does the board vote on a COLA amount every year?
So we discussed this for about 3 different years probably, and then the result was that there was a study, a pretty extensive study conducted by James. And I don't know, James, you want to just describe that a little bit?
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The COLA is, what we do is, we get a letter from our actuary, and under the county employee retirement law, the COLA granted is tied to the consumer price index for the relevant region. I conducted a study a year or two ago, and the results of that study were that we changed from the Bay Area to the western region of the U.S., and that will be revisited in 5 years. But the calculation is done by the actuary every year based on what we state as the region, which is now the western region, and they calculate the inflation rate, recommend to the board that we grant that number up to 3%, and that's what the board does.
Recommend to what board?
This board.
This board decides COLA?
This board
Not the
decides
Board
the
of
COLA
Suits.
amount. Yes,
Okay.
that is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And then now I'm going to go back to item 6C. So because the contribution rates, just like what we are recommending to the board today, as a result of 17 valuation, won't be kicked in or put into place until the upcoming fiscal years 18-19. So there's always a 1 year delay or 1 year schedule delay in implementing the contribution rates. Now, had it not been for the fact that that there was some changes in the actuarial assumptions, the contribution that would have been paid for by the county would have been actually higher than what's actually anticipated or required for the fiscal year. So there's always a gain and loss item, although as you can see, it's a very small $53,000 this year because of that 1 year delay between the rate calculation and the rate implementation. And there's always I would call it a catch-all category, so this is something that we call the other actuarial experience gains and losses. But you would generally like that item to remain relatively small, so in this case it's about $1 million. So definitely last but not least, for this year, had it not been for the fact that there was a change in the actuarial assumptions, namely the interest rate and the mortality assumptions that recommended by your actuary SIGO and approved by the retirement board, the unfunded liability actually would have come down. But because we have remeasured the liability using the assumptions approved by the retirement board, there was an increase in the unfunded liability of $28 million. So you can see on the net basis, the unfunded liability still has come up by 18, but it would have come up even more by $10 million had it not been for the other favorable actuarial experience captured by primarily the investment gains, even after asset smoothing, captured by salary increases less than expected from our active employees, COLA increases coming in less than expected from among our retirees. So, but on the net basis, there's still an increase, and there's still an increase that we project when we present to you the assumptions in April, and it is now materializing, although it's mitigated somewhat by $10 million because of other favorable actuarial experience. So that is the reason why, if you look at the unfunded liability, it has gone up by about $18 million between 2016 and 2017. So maybe with that, we'll go back to the rather than to skip back to the section 1, maybe I'll give you a summary of how the contribution rate for the employee has changed. So why don't we look at page 19 of the report. Page 19, so this is in section 2. So one thing that I like about page 19 is that most of the items that you can see on page 19 have to do with reconciling how the employer rates has changed are very similar, almost verbatim, as the reasons why you can see as to why the unfunded actuarial to accrued liability has gone up on page 46. So if we look at page 19, based on the 2016 valuation, the contribution rate that was approved by the board last year averaged about 31.7%, 31.77%. Now, as a board may remember, every year when we present this page, we always want to remind the board there's no department in the county or the special district which is paying that rate of 31.77. This is really an average rate, average out over the general payroll, safety payroll, and the probation. So this is on the whole, in the aggregate, how much the how much it would cost to continue to run the retirement association to make sure that we have enough assets in the long run to satisfy and pay out the benefits to our retirees. So last year, when we asked this question, it was about 31.7%. In dollar terms, it's about $19 to $20 million. So if we look at the very bottom line of this page, the contribution rate has gone up and is now, as recommended in this valuation, again, it's still based on an average rate, total rate for the retirement association as a whole. It is 34.9%. for about $21 million, $22 million. So definitely has gone up by about 3.1%, 3.2%, and in dollar terms, it's about $2 million. There's a page coming up on the employees' contribution, but this is just how the employer rates have gone up. So let's take a look at some of the reasons why the employer's contribution rate have gone up by about 3% of payroll. Now, there's always going to be some change in the membership demographics from one year to the next. So the question is, when we set the contribution rate requirement in the plan, we have to come up with a rate in two pieces. There's a normal cost associated with providing additional years of benefit service to our active employees, and that normal cost is calculated based on a concept called the average entry rate. So generally speaking, the younger the members enter the plan, the less expensive it would be to provide for that year of service under the funding methodology. And the reason why this came about is because it's just interest compounding. The earlier we can get the money into the plan, the sooner we can invest the money on behalf of that employee in our retirement system, and we will be able to pay off a lion's share of the benefit payments via interest, as instead of collecting those in contributions. But every year there's always going to be some change. Employees may be getting a little bit younger or maybe getting a little bit older when they enter the plan. So this year is actually to our favor. Average entry age has come down a little bit, the normal cost has come down a little bit. It's about 0.14% of payroll, 87 million. So, like I said, in our other page, there's a 1 year delay between the rate calculation and the rate implementation. It's positive on the unfunded liability, it's also positive on this end as well. But then take a look at item 3. So this is the item that Lee, you asked the question. So what was the investment experience and how has that helped out the retirement association during the course of 2016-17? Now, in dollar terms, that reduction in the unfunded liability was about $5 million. So now if we take the $5 million, amortize that gain over a period of 18 years, that has resulted in a contribution rate reduction on item number 3 on page 19 of 0.65% of payroll. So this $5 million, when spread over a period of 18 years, which is the period that you use for gains and losses, actuarial gains and losses, has a positive impact of reducing the contribution rate of 0.65%. In dollar terms, just 1 year, we reduced the county's contribution by almost $500,000, $405,000. And then likewise, if you look at the impact of lower than expected salary increases, again, same kind of a principle. It has a rate reduction impact of 38 basis points. And then I'm going to go back to item 5 in a second. Let's complete item 6. So again, retirees, COLAs did come in less than the 3% we anticipate. We reduced the contribution rate by 0.27%. So there's always other experience gains and loss items, so that's 0.16. And last, definitely but not least, will be the effect of change in the actuarial assumptions. It reduced, by reducing the investment return assumption just from 7.25 to 7, by anticipating that our retirees are living longer, the two of them combined together increase the unfunded liability by $28 million. It also has an impact to increase the normal cost. So if you look at the two combined together, it has a rate impact of 4%, over 4%. And so that basically dominates all the other actuarial impacts and result in the contribution rate increase. Now I'm going to go back to item 5. So what happened is, I think this is related to the question that the chair raised at the beginning of the conversation, which is, so anytime the salary increases for the county, or for that matter for the other special districts, if it were not to come in as anticipated, based on our growth assumption of 3.5%, so what happens? We know that, at least as far as that year's contribution is concerned, we always will collect an amount of contribution equal to whatever is the salary, actual salary times the payroll rate, or the dollar amount of the contribution if greater. So we will never, from now on, be falling further behind because the payroll base is coming in less than expected. So that's the great news. On the other hand, now because we have a shrinking payroll base, we still have the same amount of unfunded liability to service going forward. So if you can imagine that the rate is always calculated by taking the payment that we need to collect by the payroll is failing to grow as fast as we expected, then the contribution rate going forward will have to go up. So that is really the reason why you can see on line item number 5, because the payroll for the employers as a total, primarily the county, has not come up as the 3.5% that we have anticipated. So even though if we were to not have any actuarial gains and losses, we would still have to collect more as a payroll rate. Not necessarily more dollars, but as when the dollar amount is expressed as a percentage of payroll base, because the denominator is now getting smaller. The payroll that we have to spread the payment over is smaller. So that has an impact on this year on increasing the contribution rate, just the rate by 0.35%.
So Andy, this is sort of looking backwards, right? Because in the most recent contracts, which became mostly effective October, I believe the different increases would aggregate over 3.5%.
Yeah, that's right. So this has projected in it a growth going forward of, again, in air quotes, only 3.5. So to the extent that the actual pay increases come in at 4 or 4.5, it would have a positive impact, but it won't be remeasured until the next valuation. So right now, the assumption is made that from now on, for the next, say, 18 years, the payroll growth is only at 3.5%.
Where's, you talk about using inflation when you talk about setting these assumptions up. Where does the gain or loss from real inflation show up in this set of numbers?
Yeah, it's really in 2 places. It's in the salary increase assumption. So this would be the effect of the lower than expected salary increases in item 4 for our active employees. It's also showing up in the cost of living adjustment assumption for the retirees, because we have continued to assume that, at least on the long term, in the long term anyway, COLA will come in at 3%. So to the extent it's coming in less, then you will see that at least for the retirees on line item number 6. So it's really a combination of line item number 4 for the actives in terms of active salary increases, as well as retiree cost of living adjustment in line item number 6.
So there's no separate application of inflation to all the numbers here, they're just incorporated in those 2 places.
That's right. And then, of course, it's also incorporated in the total payroll growth. So to the extent that now for the county or the special district employers as a whole, the payroll growth is less because inflation is less, then it's now showing up also in line item 5. So, but it's all measured as part of something else as opposed to just measuring the impact of inflation.
Thank you.
So that's the impact on the employer rate. And again, the employer rate would have gone up even higher, not just the 3.15%, but would have come up higher, 4.15%, had it not been for the other factors that mitigate and hold the rate down by about 1% because of, for example, salary increases less than expected, COLA increases less than expected, investment returns coming in greater than expected, even on this smooth value basis.
I was just curious, on the COLA, for the PEPPER members, I noticed that the county doesn't have a normal cost, which of course they wouldn't, but there is a UAL associated with that. Is that just, I mean, you have to spread that across all the employees for the county, whether they get it or not, whether they get the COLA or not.
Exactly. That's, I think, an observation well made, because the way the payment amount or the rate to the unfunded actuarial accrued liability is calculated is that we expect the payroll for the county, for example, to grow at the assumed rate of 3.5% for the next 18 years. Now the difficulty is if we only collect that payment amount over the payroll base of the folks getting, for example, COLA benefits, then we know that the legacy plan is closed. So any payroll that would allow us to grow the rate of payroll at a rate of 3.5% has got to come from our new members, folks who have not been hired today. So that is the reason why it's not an exception, it's rather the norm within the 37 Act and the CalPERS community, all the public plan, all the public agencies. anytime they calculate the contribution rate, they always have to encumber the payroll for the people, even though those folks are not necessarily benefiting from the same plan. They have a CalPERS formula, they don't have the legacy formula, but when it is time to divide up the unfunded liability, everybody, that rate is calculated over everybody's payroll. So it's only when it is time to determine the normal cost, when it is time to determine how much to charge to, especially to the members, because you have a less rich formula. So the question is, how much should you pay towards that benefit formula? And the answer is, we only calculate the normal cost for, especially for the members, using the formula that he or she is enrolled in. We never take the better formula for our legacy members and have that cost be paid for, at least on the normal cost, by the legacy, by the capital members.
I had a question. I'm just trying to understand for Pepper members then, when they get a lot of the salary raises for them came in the form of one-time payouts that aren't pensionable. So for those payouts each year, those don't count in the payroll, right? Or in the projected payroll, or how does that work?
Yeah, now I know that there are some one-time increases that may not be pensionable. Now, if that were to be the case, then you actually won't get to even see those, because the payroll that we have will be the pensionable. Now, I also understand that there might be some one-time increases which are pensionable, but those are the ones that we get to see. I think we were providing through James to the county some contribution rate impact if those one-time increases were pensionable with the granted. So I think those were provided to the county so that that information is available to them so they know what the contribution rate impacts are.
Okay.
So then, so let's turn over to the following page. Take a look at the member rate and see how that has trended from the 2016 to the 2017 valuation. And again, there are far fewer items, as you can see on this page 20 compared to page 19. And the reason why that is the case, as Mr. Schumacher has indicated, anytime there's a deviance in the actuarial experience relative to the actuarial assumptions, so that is when the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, the UAAL, either goes up or goes down, the members, our employees, would not share in that, be it a positive or negative experience. So in other words, all the responsibility to pay off the unfunded actuarial accrued liability would belong to the county. So the county or the employer will only be responsible for paying off or that increase or decrease in the UAAL contribution rate. So on this page, the only reasons why there's a change in the member rate is because there's a change in the factors that contribute to that change in the normal cost rate. Now, for the 2016 to 2017 years, even though there was a change in demographics that I explained on the employer side, but when it is time to translate that into a rate impact for the employee, is very little. So there's virtually no impact. Now, there's a remeasurement of the normal cost as a result of the change in the assumption. Again, I keep going back to the interest rate assumption and the mortality table. So to the extent that those assumptions are tightened up and made more conservative, there's going to be a rate impact on the employees. So on an average basis, when we average it out over general, our safety and our probation members, that contribution rate impact is 0.4% or roughly $250,000. So whereas the employees' contribution rate are expected to go up because of this valuation, but definitely is not going up by as much as the employer. And because the employer is responsible for paying not just the increase in the normal cost, but they're also responsible for paying the entire amount of the increase due to the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. So I think, if you don't have any questions, so we'll go back to the front of the report now. So I think if I look at section 1, page II, Roman numeral 2, so it does take into consideration of the items that we've already covered. So I think we have covered the last 2 bullet points. This has to do with the how the employer's rate of change, how the employer's rates have increased from 2016 to 2017. We have also covered how the employee's rates have changed from 2016 to 2017. And by the way, I'm not going to go through the tables for you, but at the back of the report, there's a rate table for each and every membership category. So if you're a legacy member, or if you're a CalPERS member, if you want to find out what is my contribution rate going to be, what the stakeholders' contribution rate is going to be, you can look at the back of the report. So now if we go to the following page, triple I, Roman numeral 3. So I'm looking at the first bullet, full bullet point. So this really goes back to the point that the chairman raised at the beginning of the meeting. So how do we set the contribution rate for the unfunded liability? How do we make sure that we don't fall behind? And the answer is we charge the employers an amount to pay off the unfunded liability based on the dollar amount that we calculate in the valuation report. Since that policy has been implemented, actually the payroll for the employers as a whole has been going up more than the assumption. Now, there is a year, I think this may be the first time, where there's actually a shortfall. I think we were looking at was it the cemetery district? I cannot remember how many employees they have, it's just a very small handful. 6 or 5. And there was one, okay, 4. Yeah, there was one employee who retired was not replaced. So as a result, the contribution that they sent to the association during 17-18 was less than what we expect them to send in, at least in terms of the dollar amount. So as a result, we're going to be sending them a bill, not a big amount, but it's still nonetheless a bill for $3,722. So and that is because when we apply the contribution rate to the payroll, it's coming in less. And the amount which is coming in less is by about $3,000 to $4,000 during 16 and 17.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, the issue was not, they did replace the individual, but there was just a gap.
Oh, okay.
And that was the result, because it took some time from the time the individual retired until they got a new person on board. And that was the gap there, so it's been addressed. We're working.
And then the very last bullet that I will go through with you in this report is, so remember I said because we have used the so-called smooth actuarial value of assets, where every year when we have an investment gain, we don't take all the investment gains into account, we only recognize 1/5. Likewise, if we were to have an investment loss, we will only recognize 1/5 of that amount. So the question is, how much in investment gains and losses we have relative to the assumption? Very pleased to report that if you look at the triple I, Roman numeral 3, this year we are sitting on investment gain because in 2017, even though it's not a huge amount, the gain that we're sitting on nonetheless and not used to set the contribution rate requirement is $3.9 billion. So it's a gain of $3.9 billion. Now, if you look at last year's valuation report, that was a loss because 2015-16 was not a great year on investment. So there was an investment loss that we were sitting on when Dirk and I came to report the valuation to you in 2016 because that loss was 24.7. So that is the case. So we turned things around quite a bit. That 16%, close to 16% market return has done wonders to the retirement system. So not only have we been able to recognize 1/5 of that amount and have a net gain of $5 million, which reduced the unfunded liability, but we have effectively turned the $24.7 million loss into a gain that we are now sitting on. So you can think of that as some kind of rainy day fund that we can be sitting on. But make no mistake, the market will continue to be volatile. So it can happen that this year is a gain, and next year could be an even bigger gain or maybe a market loss. So this is something that we don't know. And that's the reason why we truly believe in the assets moving, because it's just allowed us time to let the market play itself out. So just like it did in 2016-17, we were able to turn the market loss into a market gain plus some and rainy day reserve fund of $3.9 billion. But if you want to take a look and see how those gains will be recognized, I would like you to turn to page 5 of the report. So this is really just how the mechanics of how the assets moving method actually works. So I'm not going to go through all the math with you, but I'm just going to, for example, take item 2E. So this is for the year ended June 30, 2017, about the middle of the table, chart number 7. I'm going to take a look at ask the question, so what is the actual market return that we have? So for that year, it's about $66 million. Because we expect the fund to earn the assumed rate back then, it was 7.25% before the change in the assumptions. we only expect the fund to return 30 million. So the market was very great, it was very good to us, and the actual return was 67. We only expect the fund to earn about 31. So as a result, we have earned $36 million more than expected. So that's what's appear under the investment gains and loss column. So like I said, anytime we have good investment news, we only recognize that amount over a period of 5 years, 20%. So that is why we're holding off and recognizing the remaining 80%. So if you do the math, that's how we came up with the $3.9 million in item 2F. But the part that I want you to be reminded about is, take a look at the footnote number 1, the first asterisk. So if you ask so how would the $3.9 million in gains be recognized if we just continue to earn the assumed rate on the market value basis 7%? So how would those $3.9 million be recognized over the next several years? The answer is, for the first year, because we have so much gain from the 2017 year, so we would actually have a great year again next year, but not as good as it was in 2017, because the good news was only about 2.9 million. So followed by some market losses, followed by some market losses, and then followed by a lot of market gains. Now, again, you don't want to be too fixated on these numbers. This just shows you that we continue to pay attention to how much gains and losses we have, because one thing that I can almost guarantee you is that for 17-18, you're not going to earn 70%. So it's always going to be either high or lower, but nobody can tell. But this would be, and again, another reason why you want to use a smoothing method is because anytime we have great news, we just turn that great news into smaller pieces of good news. Anytime where you have worse news, we turn that into 4 or 5 chunks of bad news. So that way you won't be asking the employer, asking the county to pay for all the good or the bad news in one chunk. So last but not least, I'm going to turn to page 1 of this report for you. So I'm looking at section 2, I'm sorry. So this is, again, something that I think the board should be actively be aware of. We are one of the systems where we call ourselves pretty mature. By that, we would mean, if you look at page 1, section 2, you can take a look and see how many active employees we have enrolled in our plan relative to the number of terminated vested employees. So these are the folks who have already earned a vested right to receive a benefit, but they have not yet retired from the plan, together with the number of retirees and beneficiaries who are already drawing a benefit. So if you look at 2008, for example, back in 2008, we have about 1,400 active employees. We have about, call it 1,400 retirees and deferred vested employees. So if you take a look at the number of inactive retirees as a ratio of the active, the ratio is very close to 1 or 0.97. So you can see that since the 2008 or the Great Recession, the number of retirees have continued to go up, and again, this is should not be a surprise. As the baby boomers retire from the workforce, you would generally expect the number of retirees to grow. On the other hand, because of budgetary constraints of the county and the special districts, take a look at the number of active employees that we have enrolled in our plan. It was at 1,400 in 2008. The number has keep going down because of the recession until it drops to a level of about 1,069 in 2012, and then it is since on a upward rebound, and I don't think that is a great growth curve. But nonetheless, if you take a look now at the 2017, 10 years after the Great Recession in 2018, we now have more retirees and deferred vested members compared to the number of active employees. So the ratio, as a matter of fact, is about 1.7%. So that means that for every 170 or so retirees, we only have about 100 active employees. Now, on the one hand, the great news is we are not Social Security. That's why we have $500 million sitting in our trust fund, because we know that one day will come, and the day has already come, when our retirees will be asking us to pay them a pension. So that's the great news. On the other hand, anytime we have favorable or especially unfavorable actuarial experience, remember I said earlier on, the unfavorable actuarial experience, the unfunded liability, would have to be paid off and expressed as a percentage of payroll. So everything else being equal, if we have lost about 400 of our colleagues or 300 of our colleagues since 2008, The payroll base has eroded somewhat. So anytime we have bad news, unfunded actuarial to accrue liability, we have to take that unfunded liability and spread over payroll, which is now not as big as it was like 10 years ago. So it is just a more volatile system, because anytime we have bad news, again, repeating myself, anytime we have bad actuarial experience, that bad actuarial experience would have to be spread over the payroll, not for the 1,400 employees like we had about 10 years ago, but only over the payroll of 1,100 employees. So this is something that, again, that the board should be aware of.
Are the vested terminated members, that's also hovering around 500 people, 100 to 500. Are these people who are working both for another public agency and also people who are just working in the private sector, but they're not retired?
It could, so if I may, I'll jump in, Andy. The vested terminated members have worked in this plan for a minimum of 5 years and then left active employment here. Whether some of those have gone on to reciprocal plans, and some of those have gone elsewhere. And if someone establishes reciprocity, even if they weren't here for 5 years, they stay in this category, correct? So they could have been with Mendocino County for 18 months, left to go to a reciprocal agency, and they would still be counted in the vested terminated members. So if they're non-reciprocal, they had to be here at least 5 years. If they've left and established reciprocity, they could have been here for any period of time. So, but it does include both of those categories.
Yeah, because we are also the actuary for Sonoma County, so I know that we have a lot of our members leaving the Mendocino County to go to work at Sonoma County.
Excuse me. This trend, even though we see the active members trending upward a bit, I mean, this trend of having more retirees with a long lifespan is going to increase, right? I mean, that's anticipated. So what's the solution to?
That's a good question.
I mean, does that figure into the recommended contributions by the employer and the employees?
Yeah, definitely, we have taken this into account, maybe not directly, but indirectly, when we, for example, recommend mortality assumptions, life expectancy assumptions. We want to be sure that we have reasonable and equitable and justifiable assumptions to anticipate that longer life expectancy, so that members will pay their normal cost contribution using that longer life expectancy, employers will pay contribution using that longer life expectancy. I think the fact that we have more retirees, basically meaning that more dollars we would have to provide for those pension benefits as opposed to the contribution coming in. I think that has also been discussed as part of the setting of the investment return assumptions. I think there was an argument that was made that, okay, well, if the money cannot come into the trust from the employer or the employee contributions, because the moment we get the money, we have to cut a check to go to a retiree. So is that going to be a problem in justifying everything else being equal, the 7% investment return assumption? So I think we reach out to James and Stan, the staff level, and basically find out from them, so how do they manage the day-to-day cash flow? So the question is, if the money can not even be in the trust to earn give them time to expand and get the assumed rate, are we in a position where we constantly have to hold some cash to be sure that those monies that they pay? I know that the staff done a good job because they always pay attention to that, the fact that we have to make these benefit payments. They're very highly predictable. So my understanding is that James in particular look at those, make sure that they continue to have cash on hand, but not too much cash, because they can always sell, especially for a fund that invest very heavily in mutual funds. You can actually, through execute the transaction with very minimal transaction costs, be able to get the cash in your account in very short notice. So I think they don't park too much cash. Is that right, James?
That is absolutely
Be sure
correct.
that yeah.
So Andy, hasn't there been some discussion about maybe if the county prepaid some of the contribution rate rather than making the payment with each, or I don't know how often it's made with each payroll? If the county made payments further in advance, then there'd be a little more cash flow into the system and an opportunity for that money to earn a return. So I don't know where that's gone. I know it's been discussed a couple times.
The idea, if I may, I'll take that, Mr. Chairman. The idea has been floated. There have been some conversations with the county, but they never seem to go anywhere very rapidly. There was, I believe the county did talk to an external provider who offered a solution, who was willing to act as an intermediary in that case and manage the money for the county. But I don't know where that is. It's not something that is a great benefit to the retirement system because we're getting the same amount of contributions. I believe in the 37 Act, if there is a prepayment, there's a discount because of the expected interest to be earned kind of thing. So it's not really viewed as a benefit to the retirement system. It's kind of a neutral for us. So it's not something we've been pursuing.
Are you familiar with some agencies that are doing that?
Yeah, I think we have seen it done in one of two ways. One would be that rather than to send in the contributions, I'm only talking about one particular fiscal year, so let's say 18-19, so we recommend the contribution rate 35%, for example. So rather than to have the county sending the money on a bi-weekly payroll cycle, some counties have considered sending us the money at the beginning of the year. So the question is, if we get to use that money ahead of time, we will be able to invest that money for the entire year instead of incrementally throughout the year. So some retirement systems have been open to providing the county with some kind of a discount. So that's what James was talking about on a year-by-year basis. I think the other concept that have been used, but we haven't seen that done very often now. I think last time it was coincidentally Sonoma County. So what happened was, rather than to send us the contribution on a year-by-year basis, they decide to give us a certain amount of money. So for example, they decided to cut a check for us for $100 million. So that's to buy down a certain portion of the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. So that way, they would effectively not just reduce the UAL contribution for 1 year, but for several years, whatever the case might be, depends on the size of the payment. So this is through sometimes called the issuance of pension obligation bonds.
That last statement, I was gonna suggest that's what we did a number of years ago. We had to figure it out against possible interest costs and the estimated rate of return. So over a 2-year period, if you're gonna be winners or losers by paying with bonds. I would like to see us agendize this item as a separate discussion in the very near future and actually play out some of the scenarios. It may or may not be a benefit to us per se, unless it's a year like this year. But it's definitely something I think we should all understand, so we can talk to the Board of Supervisors about it, because it certainly affects the UAAL possibilities. Because due to, compounding what you owe us and your loss of return, like this year, it turns into something like 15% or 16% of an increase in the UAAL for not us having the money and you owing it. So that's a rough.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, just as a clarification. What is it specifically you'd like for the board to discuss? The prepayment options or?
I think if you talked about it as a prepayment option, it would keep it a simpler discussion.
Okay.
Less calculation having to be made.
I just wanted to be absolutely clear what was included there, whether it was prepayments or pension obligation bonds or.
No. I'll make this comment real quick. Pension obligation issuance, the last time we did it cost us $1 million. And that $1 million, if done by you guys directly paying us, goes to the bottom line for us all instead of off into a consultant's pocket.
So after that, the county also has a pension gap reserve that's established over the last 3 or 4 years, and it's
4 million?
4 or 5,
Yeah.
maybe it's 5 million.
Yeah.
So unless it's earning our estimated rate of return, it's a loser.
No, it's
It's
sitting
sitting there in the pool, we just went over 1%.
Yeah, there you go, so you just lost 6%, but
Yeah.
we just made 16,
No,
so
But that's been a problem as far as how to get that into the system.
So,
That's
so I
been a
agree,
struggle.
so I mean, I personally would like us to include that as part of the analysis.
Yeah.
Because that's not the same thing as floating a bond, that money's sitting in there for the purpose of the fund.
Okay, anyway,
And I know that there was some software purchase recently, I think I mentioned this last time, that, so James, I don't know if you got a copy of that or not, but.
I do not have access, have not asked for it, haven't gotten access to that. But it's something we can look into.
thank you.
So I think we've covered most of what I'd like to go through with the board today. Maybe unless there are any questions that could conclude our prepared remarks.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Kathy, I wanted to circle back to your point about the membership trends. And wanted to, as kind of an educational point, remind all the trustees that when we're setting these mortality rates, there is a built-in factor for growth there. So to really simplify it down, if you just think of an expected, a pure life expectancy number, if our life expectancy for our members is hypothetically 86 years old, we build in a number there where we actually say, okay, based on our experience, we think the number is 86, but we're actually going to assume that it's 87 and a half.
Okay.
So there's a factor in there for increasing life expectancy over time. And then, as we've seen, so we set the number at 87 and a half, and over time it creeps from 86 up towards 87. Well, then we push the number out even further. So we're always building in a little bit of a factor. We could push that out farther. The problem with that is the farther you push that out, the higher the contributions go. And there's it opens up the intergenerational equity arguments of, if you push it out too far, then you're requiring members and sponsors to pay more than is necessary to fund the plan. So it's a balancing act, but we always build in that growth factor in the mortality specifically because of the experience we've been seeing in the past several decades, I would say. Andy, did I hit that
Yeah.
adequately?
Yeah, I think that's true. As a matter of fact, in the most recent experience study, the factor that Dr. Wilbanks was referring to used to be that we only recommend a 10% so-called margin, but we double up the amount of margin to 20%. There's a school of thought out there that you can actually more accurately project using a so-called generational mortality table, and we won't go there yet. We did not go there yet for the Retirement Association, but we have since taken some of the larger systems and recommend that assumption to the boards of retirement. The rate impact is about the same, but we definitely are not just satisfied with because our members are living to 86 and therefore we just assume everybody will die at 86. We always have some margin and we double up the margin in the last study.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to bring that back in and share with the board and remind everyone of that issue.
Yeah. One more question. I keep saying one more, but I keep thinking of others. So I noticed in the recap that you did, James, of the board workshop and our goals, one of them, or maybe this was something that was you guys already have on your goal sheet, but fully funded by 2040 or something like that. So are we on track to do that, given these numbers and these assumptions that we've made? And
So I would jump back to, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I would jump back to page 48 and steal a little bit from Andy here. Is that where you were going, Andy?
Yeah.
48?
I'm 48.
So you can see here all of the unfunded liability of $204 million, how it's broken down, and when it will, in effect, roll off the books, when we will pay it off. The number 2040 in our strategic plan, or the year 2040, was chosen very intentionally, and that is the year after this combined base gets paid off.
Okay.
So we knew when we set that as an objective that we had this 20, at the time it was 25 years, I think, that we were still working on. It's the basketball working through the snake, if you will. And that we couldn't really do anything about that other than work the plan over time. So it was intentionally, 2040 was chosen strategically. By all of this, looking at these years remaining, if we stay on plan, if we meet our assumptions, if we stay true to our funding policy, we will meet that objective. Now, the other part of this is eventually we're going to have additional layers. So every year we have a small number that gets added or subtracted from the UAL. Once we get the basketball worked through the snake, then we will be at the point where we will be working marbles through the snake. And the intention is that the positive marbles will offset the negative marbles, and that it will average out around 0 each year. Does that?
Yeah, that's absolutely.
And 2040 is the quickest we could get to that point.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, an unfunded liability in the pension world is a simple problem. There are only two levers, time and money. We could shorten our amortization period from this 22 years for the combined base. It requires more money to do that. At the time the board made the decision to adopt this 27-year amortization, it was actually done 3 years prior when the board closed to a 30-year amortization schedule. The decision was made that plan sponsors could not, probably couldn't tolerate contribution rates that would be required if we shortened the amortization schedule any further than that. So.
I understand.
Through the chair, I think the other evidence, as Sherry has alluded to, is when we provide the board with the information item, the amortization schedule, you also see how the current 204 million will taper off over time, and the last year that amortization schedule is going to be in year 2039 or 2040 or thereabouts. Yeah.
Andy, I don't want to be Pollyannish, but with the economy and everything that's going on, do you see in the future possibilities of increasing the assumed interest?
Oh, you mean increase or decrease?
Increase.
Okay.
Hey, head back towards 8.
I
Head back to 7.5, 7.25.
Yeah, never say never, but I think the chances of that would be very small. As a matter of fact, as the board may be aware, when we were here, when Paul and myself were here presenting to the board in April, we were looking at the, it's not the herd mentality, but you always want to know what other similarly situated retirement systems have adopted in terms of the assumptions. So when we were here in April, 7% is by far the most conservative assumptions, actuarial assumption, interest rate assumption. But since that time, systems have moved on. We are the actuarial auditor at 2 systems that have since dropped their assumption below the 7. So for example, at the July 2017 San Sarah San Mateo County Retirement Board meeting, where the auditing actuary again, the retained actuary recommend the investment return assumption to be dropped to 6.75%. So they are the first county retirement system to drop below the 7, so they're 6.75. And then at the charter city retirement system that we are the actuarial auditor, this is over the city of San Diego. The board has moved to reduce the investment return assumption to 6.75% in the 17 valuation, and then to move it down below 6.75 to 6.5 as part of the 2018 valuation. I know that I'm not answering your question directly, Tim, but I think the trend of the industry is definitely to continue to tighten up that assumption. So every conference that we go to, we always sit in the room with the other actuaries. I think the appetite for an increase in the assumption, at least in the short term, is close to none. I think everybody's talking about it.
I'm not really sure I understand it, because Greg is going to show us a report here shortly. I think our 5-year return is close to 9. We
James?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, as the non-actuary, non-investment person, but the economist in the room, and thinking about that very long term, I think there's a very real possibility that at some point in the future, there will be discussion about moving in the other direction with the assumed rate of return. The largest single factor that I think is driving the discussion towards lowering assumed rates of return is the extremely low rates of inflation that we've had for the past decade. At some point, inflation is going to come back, and if you step back and think about how we build our assumed rate of return, it's a building block of inflation plus real return, which is largely, real return is tied to GDP growth, real GDP growth. It's the inflation that we've been missing for so long. Eventually, it has to come back. I don't know when and I don't know where, but at some point, things have to return to what we believe is some sort of normal here, where we have an inflation rate of around 3% on a long-term average. So when that comes back to us, I think 7% will look a little, will look tepid. So I don't think it will be fast. I think it will probably be at least a decade before we start talking about that. But it is out there and I can see it. So I can be a lot more confident because, like I've told you before, first thing I learned in my forecasting class, you either tell them what's going to happen or when, but not both. I can tell you that at some point inflation will come back and we'll start talking about more normal in the long-term scheme of things rates of return.
Is that the Tokyo version?
Stay zero forever. And just for the new members too, and we talked about this at our strategic planning, is the OPEB, not OPEBs, the POBs, the pension obligation bonds, those will be paid off in 2026. So right now, the county pays $8 million a year towards the POBs. And so about $4 million of that comes right out of the general fund. So once that gets taken care of, a decade, as James talking about, a decade from now, there will be, although I can never ever imagine raising the assumptions. That's yeah, but that's
it's politically driven as well.
Yeah, but I mean, it's hard to imagine that right now. Ever being able to do that, that would be amazing if that became an issue.
I am Pollyanna.
Sir, were those 20-year bonds, 25-year bonds?
They were issued in 2002,
2002.
so yeah.
Some of them had 1-year maturities, some of them had a variety of maturities.
Has anybody been thinking about what impact the disaster is going to have on all this? I mean, the loss of property taxes over the next 2 years, what that's going to do. I mean, we just did a back of an envelope at my office and came up with like $300 to $400 million in lost property taxes over the next couple of years.
There's a call this afternoon with Senator McGuire to talk about that. So that'll be discussed with Sonoma, Mendocino, and I believe Napa, and probably those 3 counties maybe. I don't know if you want to address that. Property taxes, the county only gets 30% of that. The rest of that goes to schools. So schools get like 63% or something like that, and then you have the little extra going to the cities and the special districts. So, and the schools are typically made whole by the state, so the county gets 30% of the tax dollars. So I don't know, Supervisor Jurdy may know more on this. Yeah, okay. So yes, it will be an impact.
Any
But-
idea roughly what the percentage of our property taxes were by the roughly 500 homes lost in Redwood Valley?
I think that's being determined right now as to what that is. That's being looked at.
I have to make one comment. That is, schools are made whole if you're K-12. If you're community colleges,
so
you're
you
not
didn't
made
get,
whole.
so you didn't get made whole. Well, bummer.
Yeah,
Bummer to be a college president.
that's right.
Yeah, so that's, yeah, so that's what I know about that. But we'll know more. Probably the next meeting, we will probably know more on that.
I think Andy's concluded the presentation of the annual valuation. If the board wanted to accept that, or just acknowledge it, we could, unless there's more questions. I believe there's one more question, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, one more question. I was trying to look through this real quick at Tier 4 for Pepra employees. And so this is a question, might be a question to you, James, and not to anybody. So if the combined contribution rate of employees and employer is about 44%, is that 22 and 22 for Pepra employees?
No.
What is it? How does that work out?
So the short math is you take and this is not exactly the way it works, but the way it's categorized in my brain, and you take the normal cost, that gets shared 50-50 for Pepper members. The UAAL is all on the employer.
So you gotta subtract a portion of the 34 that you AAL?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Correct.
Right.
And that's very much a simplification of the real way it works according to the actuaries, but, you know, us economists can only do so much math, so.
The rest is guesswork, right?
Isn't the
Educated,
Pepper
that's working.
employee contribution supposed to be half of the counties to the normal cost?
Yes.
Yeah, and they are.
Or it's half of the total, not half of the counties. So it's half of the total contribution for normal cost.
I thought it was half of just the of normal cost. Okay, it's not half. I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the actuarial valuation for June 30th, 2017.
I'll second.
Motion second. I don't think we need roll call, there's no money involved. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so now,
We now have the next agenda item.
Thanks, Andy. I
Thank
was
you.
really
Thank you both.
Thank you.
He's not done
Very
yet.
much, very much.
You can't leave. You
Yeah.
can't leave.
Next is the Government Accounting Standards 67 report, the skinny report.
Does anyone want a hard copy?
I would.
I'm not sure this thing's working. I think it's back.
Yeah, the Wi-Fi is up, should be up.
This is all good.
Thank you.
Retirees.
Restart.
It's the button on the top.
Mine says-
One more.
Yeah,
restart.
Looking for
Good gal.
it. Find it. Ooh, kill it, kill it.
okay, well, looks like we have hard copies. What page do you want to start us on?
Yeah, so maybe I'll throw out a quick introduction, and I'll have my partner, Dirk Adamson, go through this report, the highlights for the report with the board. So this report that you have already adopted is to provide for the contribution rate requirements for the 2017-18 fiscal year, and then for the other reports, key report, this is for the so-called financial reporting, satisfy the financial reporting requirements. So there's a report that we need to do for the retirement association. So this is when you put together your financial statement. So your auditor will be asking for a copy of this report. So once this report is approved by the board, then we'll be putting together a companion report, although this time we'll be going into a little bit more detail, employer by employer, the county, the cemetery district, or the superior court, telling them what the net pension, net OPEB, net pension liability, the NPL, which is really in actuarial speak the same as the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, as we've been talking about this morning, but measured on a market value basis. So that report will be forthcoming. It will be released around the early part of the middle part of next year. So this is, again, the financial reporting. It is for the retirement association. So maybe with that, I'll turn it over to you and
Sure.
tell us what page we want to look
We'll
at.
just start on Roman numeral I, down at the bottom, just to throw out a couple of terms to get used to. As Andy alluded to, we're talking about liabilities, so the GASB term here is total pension liability, TPL. These are the same liabilities that were measured in the funding valuation report on the same set of assumptions. So there's no difference there between the liabilities that Andy went through. There's the asset component. In the GASB terminologies, it's called plans fiduciary net position. The main difference between that value and the value in the funding report is that for GASB purposes, requires that we use market value of assets rather than the smooth actuarial value of assets that's used in the funding valuation report. And then the difference between the total pension liability, or TPL, and the plan's funding net position is the net pension liability, or NPL, which is basically an unfunded liability type of measurement, but again, based on the market value. That number was quoted in the funding valuation report, but just as an informational item. So if we flip the page to Roman numeral 3, it kind of gives a quick summary of the components that we just went through. So the first kind of block of numbers, we have a service cost component, which is essentially the same thing as the normal cost component from the pension valuation report. That's always measured as of the previous year for the upcoming year, based on the assumptions from that previous year. So for instance, the 2017 service cost was based on the 2016 valuation. So it's the cost of 1 year of service for fiscal year 16-17. Next line item down is the total pension liability. Again, those are the same liabilities that were quoted in the funding valuation report. Plan fiduciary net position is again the market value of assets. So you see an increase from the previous year of $426 million up to $484 million for 2017. The difference between the TPL and the assets, we have a net pension liability of $195 million. Good news is that's down from the previous year's unfunded amount of $205 million down to $195 million on a market value basis this year. One other measurement we do is on page 6. This is kind of a sensitivity analysis. So our interest rate assumption is currently at 7%. So in the middle of page 6, under the current discount rate, we see the $195 million net pension liability that we just talked about on page III. The requirement is to remeasure the NPL with a plus or minus 1% sensitivity in the interest rate. So you see if the interest rate were to drop from 7 to 6%, that 195 net pension liability would increase to $284 million. On the other hand, if our interest rate were to increase by 1% up to 8%, the $195 million would decrease to $122 million. And then just finally on page 7, that just kind of shows how we got from last year's numbers for the total pension liability and the net pension, planned fiduciary net position from last year's numbers to this year's numbers. So it's pretty straightforward, not too many numbers on here. Anything else you'd like to focus on?
Yeah, I think interestingly enough, the governmental accounting standards for the GASB also requires that if you look at bottom of page 7, we are also required to take the net pension liability, or UAAL, and divide that by the payroll. So again, here is 327%. So this payroll is the actual payroll as opposed to the projected payroll we have in the other report, but nonetheless, that's something that is required disclosure for the Retirement Association's financial statement. So what we will do is, once this report is approved by the board, we will start working on the GASB 68 report. So this is the report for the employer's financial reporting, where we will take the net pension liability or the pension expense and basically divide it up between the 3 employers. So of course, the county would get the lion's share, but nonetheless, we are required to do that for the court. We're required to do that for the cemetery district, so that they can in turn complete their financial statements using basically this report that we are recommending the board for approval today.
Do we, somewhere, do we get a scorecard across the state from all the different counties to show how we stand in all this?
I believe we do the state treasurer collects information, and I'm gonna look to Stan, because he usually does that reporting. Stan, the state treasurer information we sent, is that just on the financial reports, or do we also send in actuarial information there?
Yeah, I think you're referring to the year when I filed with the treasurer's office, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I don't know if that's compiled in a report or not. To tell you the truth, I don't know if that's something that they
Used to be.
But it's something I do on an annual basis, and I do report all this numbers to them, mainly from the actuarial report, not so much to get a specific report.
Will we be getting the Harvey Kuhn at Sackers this year?
Yes.
Can you bring that in? It's
Yeah.
not, it's got issues, but it compares
Investment performance.
the performance, not only of the 1937 Act counties, but a whole, I don't know, 100 maybe?
Something like
Somewhere
that.
in that area, and it shows where we come in compared to everyone else on different returns.
We look pretty good.
That makes sense.
Well, I heard a request, I thought that we approve this, or do we accept
Yes.
it?
Or
Yeah, that's right. I
Yeah.
think, either
approve the report, accept it. Either way, I think would suffice.
Right. So I move that we accept the net pension liability report, the GASB 67 report.
Full second.
Motion second, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Andy.
you.
Gentlemen.
So we'll take a short break, we'll resume around 10:50. All right.
You can tell he's the mayor.
10:27, we'll resume the board meeting. And next on our agenda is discussion of possible action regarding the investment matters, quarterly investment report, as well as the Callan personnel update.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. Tim already let you know what the 5-year return is, so I was just going to skip the performance update. Overall, it's a really good story. But it is a story that we can't expect to always continue going forward. And I think that's the hard part. That's the hard part where people are lowering their return expectations, even though we've earned more than we thought we would. If we came in here 5 years ago, I came in here and said you wouldn't make 9%. And lo and behold, you did, which goes to show you what I know.
But you did come in here and say we would get $500 million, and even at that time, I was
Yeah.
like, really?
Yeah.
And we're there, so.
You
yes.
crossed the
That's so nice.
threshold
You
this
did, you
time.
did say that, I remember you said that.
503.
Is that right?
I do remember you said
That's
that,
awesome.
yes, years ago. I'm sure it's on tape somewhere.
How about I cover the personnel update first, because you might be wondering where Alina is. And Alina is going to move to Portland, Oregon. As you know, we're headquartered in the Bay Area, San Francisco, and the cost of living is a headache for especially some of our younger employees. Alina being one of those people and looking to make the next steps in her life, including house and family and all of that sort of thing. So she is going to move to Portland, where the cost of living is a little lower. And I'm happy to say she's going to stay at Callan. She's going to work in our performance management operations and development group. But being a remote employee in Portland is going to make it a little more difficult for her to be coming to meetings like this with me. So she's going to be making that transition, and we're really happy that we get to keep her and that she finds a working opportunity and life opportunity that works for her. So that's why Alina's not here today. There is another guy who works with me. His name is Matt Talmadge, and he's going to start coming to meetings like this going forward, so you'll get to know Matt. And of course, there's still Greg Ungerman, who Greg and I work as a team on this account, but you don't see Greg as much because he lives about an hour and 15 minutes south of me. So getting up here is 3 or 4 hour, maybe a 3 hour drive for him in the morning. So that's part of the update about Callan team. Do you have any questions about that? I'm sure the cost of living issue is something you're dealing with up here as well.
Well, housing shortage.
And now
with the fires, yes.
a housing
And which
shortage.
will increase
Yeah.
for temporary, will increase housing
Yeah.
costs, yeah.
And I did want to start off by acknowledging the fires that you had up here, and send my sympathies to the community up here. I know that Napa and Sonoma got a lot of the press attention, but we know it impacted you up here as well. So we're thinking of you. For what it's worth, Callan did make a contribution to the Red Cross. It's the Northwest Red Cross chapter of California, and it covers Mendocino County as well as the Sonoma and Napa counties as well. So we're thinking of you and the community, and you've been a great partner of ours for years and years. So our thoughts and prayers are with you.
Thank you.
There are a couple other Callan updates. I forget if we went over this in the past, but we have a new CEO. His name is Greg Allen. Greg has been with our firm for about 30 years. And for the last 10 years, he has been the heir apparent to Ron Payton, our CEO. Ron is now going to be the executive chairman of the company. I sit next to Ron, and he's in every day, and that hasn't changed. But Ron is in his 70s, and he's going to be looking to transition more of the day-to-day responsibility to Greg over the, or really he already has transitioned that. And now Greg is more taking the formal title of CEO going forward. So Ron isn't going anywhere. You'll still see him at our conferences, speaking and introducing our conferences when you come to visit. But Greg is now the new CEO of the firm.
70s, he's in the prime of his life.
He's killing it. And I tell you what, I expect to see him for another 20 years in the office. He loves it, and Callan's a company that he built. He was the CEO for decades, and I don't see him going anywhere. Ed Callan, our founder, even after he completely transitioned out of the company, didn't have ownership of the company at all, he still came in the office, and he was there up until the year before he passed away, and that's over a decade ago. So I fully expect Ron will do a similar transition. The last little update for Callan is that, and this is weird because most time we don't come talking about Callan because we don't change a lot. But as you might know, we are a 100% employee-owned firm. We have currently about 90 shareholders, and they're all the employees. I happen to be one of the shareholders of the firm as well. So we think that's a great thing because the net income at the end of the day doesn't go up to a parent company, a public company, which helps us retain people over time. So we think that's a really good thing. But one of the awkward things about being a S corporation and being employee-owned is that you can only have 99 shareholders. That's just the law, that's the rules. So Callan was looking for a way to change our ownership structure to allow more shareholders over time. We tend to have 4, 5, 6 new shareholders every year, so we think about 2 years from now we could be over 100 shareholders. So the solution we came up with is to become an LLC owned by an S Corp, and in the future potentially multiple S Corps. That way we can have more than 100 employee shareholders in the future, and the people like Alina coming up in the ranks will then, there's a slot for her in the future. So we are now Callan LLC, where before we were Callan Associates S Corp. So that's the legal change, organizational change that we went through in August.
Exciting.
Yeah, well, that's a lot. That's a lot for us going on. Yeah, most time there's, we just don't change a whole heck of a lot. So that was, I don't think I've ever given you an update on our firm like this. So yeah. Do you have any questions about that? Any of those 3 topics?
You've done very well for us.
Oh, great. Thank you. And the performance is looks really good right now. And as I said earlier, we can't expect to replicate that going forward. But maybe as a quick backdrop about what happened in the quarter and in the year, the capital markets of late have been characterized by a steady climb upward and extreme low levels of volatility. In fact, volatility measures hit historic lows in the last quarter. So when I say volatility, it means how much variation there is in the actual market going up and down, and then there's also this implied volatility about the option market measuring how much it might go up and down and going forward. That VIX, or the fear index, you hear about from time to time. So that hit an all-time low. And at the same time, the S&P 500 hit, I think it's 13 or 14 or 15 record highs during the quarter. So very low volatility and a steady climb upward in the U.S. stock market measured by the S&P 500. So we can't expect that to continue, right? We know that's not going to continue, but that's where we're at today, and it's the backdrop of why the performance looks as good as it does right now. Another thing that happened during the quarter is that international stocks did a little bit better than U.S. stocks. Part of that has to do with growth expectations increasing in Europe in particular, but also currency. The U.S. dollar again fell in value relative to foreign currencies. And so it's down about 10% year to date. The basket of currencies in the quarter was down about 3 to 5%, depending on which currency you look at. So international stocks did well. Emerging market stocks within international did even better than developed market international stocks. So emerging stocks did well. Recall you hired a new dedicated emerging market equity manager, and their performance out of gates is pretty good for you. Another thing that happened in the quarter is technology and energy within the markets did particularly well. The energy is easy to explain in that oil was up, went from $45 to $50 a barrel. Still a lot lower than what it was before, but that's about a 10% increase. So all those oil-related companies did really well. And then we've seen what the FANG stocks have done. Facebook, Apple, I'll forget them all, Google, who's the N? That is someone, right? The FANG stocks, Apple, Amazon.
Netflix,
Yeah.
That's what I was.
But they've all been churning. In fact, technology stocks have accounted for about 40% of the gains experienced in the U.S. stock market on a year-to-date basis. So a lot of it's been concentrated in this sector, which is becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger component of the U.S. stock market. It's now 20-some%.
Netflix.
Netflix, thank you.
Oh my God, it was that. I was gonna say that too, and I think that's not right.
Reed Hastings.
All right,
Took
Richard,
over
Richard,
Elster.
yeah.
Commissioner teacher, there's none after me.
Sounds like the
And a
80s.
teacher in there.
Oh, well,
They're 90s.
Stan and I were just talking about the tech bubble when I was hired at Callan.
Yeah.
The tech bubble, yeah. It was 98 when
That was 98.
yeah. So what did I say? International did well, emerging did well, tech did well, which means growth stocks did well, US did well. That means your plan did well. We know that you have all of these biases in your portfolio. You have a little more international than other plans. You have a slight growth tilt, and I didn't mention small cap. Small cap did better than large cap, and you have a little extra small cap in your portfolio. So all of these were right in your favor during this quarter, and really it's a continuation of what we've seen in the year. So that's why I wanted to give you that context, because we know the way you're positioned, and then that explains, okay, before opening the book, we know you did pretty darn well. So let's flip ahead to, I'll flip ahead to the second page here. And here at the top of the chart and at the bottom of this page, you'll see quarter returns on the top and 1 year returns on the bottom. And we're looking at broad markets here, so large cap, small cap stocks in the US, international, fixed income, and global bonds. A couple takeaways here on this page is that everything's in the quarter is in positive territory. And for the year, all of the stocks, stock measures are well into positive territory, and bonds are close to flat. The one thing to point out on this page is that look at that little triangle relative to large cap stocks. The average manager beat the index. The index ranked in the 60th percentile and 64th percentile for the quarter and the year. Which means active managers did well. If you look at cross correlations of stocks and sectors, it's hitting a low. Where before, over the last few years, the cross correlation has been really high. What that means is everything, when the cross correlation is high, it means every stock and every sector goes up and down with the market. But when there's differentiation, when one stock's up and one stock's down, it's not all just going up and down with the market. That's where active managers tend to do well. So they spent all of this money moving into ETFs or index funds. And we have a lot of active management. We have a lot of active managers. We do have an S&P 500 index fund, but we also have a lot of active managers. And here we're seeing a time period where this active management premium has paid off. So I'm going to flip ahead to page 8, start talking about your portfolio. And the actual allocation is on the left here, the pie chart, and the right is your target allocation. And you'll see that we're pretty much right on top of each other. You're just a little overweight with international equity, a little underweight with real estate, and a little underweight with bonds. Now that real estate allocation, you have these private real estate funds where you make a commitment to them, and then they call capital from you over time. And they called about $1.5 million last quarter, but they still have some more money to call for you. It takes them a while to find properties to buy and to put the money to work. So that's essentially what's going on right now, and that's why we're a little underweight in domestic real estate. Let's flip ahead to page 9. And here is where we see what Sherry alluded to, in that we, for the quarter, at quarter end, we were at about $504 million. So went over the $500 million mark as of September for the total fund. We started with $483 million. We had net outflows of about $1.8 million. And then you had investment returns of about $21 million. Most of the investment returns came from international equity, $9 million, and US equities, about $10 million. But even fixed income eked out gains for you, as did your private real estate portfolio, both returning about $1 million on the invested assets. You see that column with all the red in it, net new investment? What that column means is money going into or out of the given fund. So net new investment is how much money is going in or out. If it's negative, it means you took money out. So during the quarter, Stan and James rebalanced the portfolio to the targets that we picked previously, and for the managers that you went through, interviewed, and hired during the previous board meetings. So you see that the S&P 500 fund received about $8 million, and your redeeming assets out of Dodge & Cox and Janus. That's going to continue to happen once you fund the equal-weighted S&P 500 index fund. So it's my understanding that they're still in contract negotiations with legal, taking a look at that. So eventually you'll see another line item here at the S&P 500 equal-weighted index fund, assuming you can come to terms with State Street. Within international equities, recall we did a whole bunch of work here too, looking at new managers. You completed the funding of the InvestTech portfolio. That's your new emerging market equity manager. I think that may have been on the first day of the quarter when you put in that $7 million. And then you redeemed assets from Columbia Acorn, and you funded the new international small cap manager, T. Rowe Price. Remember, they're one of the managers you interviewed, and you funded them with about $21.4 million. So here on this page, we see the money actually moving for all the work you did in picking these managers and all the manager searches, the manager structure, the asset allocation work we did over the past 1.5 years. Any questions about? Okay.
I have a question. So on our fixed income, it looks like we made about 1.3%.
That's right.
That's the best we can do on fixed income? Why is that?
Well, the index was up for the quarter, was up 85 basis points. So if you went out and you bought an index fund, it would have been up 85 basis points.
Index fund of bonds?
That's right. That's right. And there's this index called the Bloomberg Barclays Aggregate Index. What that index measures is U.S. dollar denominated and domiciled. Let me correct that. Registered. U.S. dollar denominated and registered investment grade securities with a maturity between 1 and 30 years. Okay, so that's this thing called the Bloomberg Barclays Aggregate. It used to be called the Lehman Aggregate, and then before that it was called the Shearson Lehman Aggregate. But anyway, so this index has changed names many times. But it's the broadest measure and most often used index out there for bond portfolios.
So my takeaway from that is we should short Bloomberg?
So, 10-year treasuries are about what, 2.3?
The yield?
Yeah.
The yield on the 10-year treasury is currently about 2.3 or 2.4. That's right.
So why are we 50?
So
Basis
this
points below
return includes both yield as well as changes in price. So over the year, you expect to earn 2.4% in yield. But if yields go up or down, you'll have
So these are that's the mark-to-market yield?
these are total returns. So it includes capital appreciation or depreciation plus any income you earn. And that's the case with all of these returns. They're net of fee total returns. So yeah, if you held the 10-year treasury for a year, you would expect to yield 2.4%. But that 10-year treasury has a duration of about 7 or 8 years. Right? So if interest rates go up 1, you're going to have a mark-to-market loss of 7 or 8.
Right.
And then you say, oh, but I had an income of 2. So my loss is only 5%. Right? But that's the way the math works. If yields go down, the opposite is true. You have about a 10% return because you take the income and you add it onto the duration of the portfolio. We have modest return expectations for fixed income going forward. You're going to make a couple percent, we think, over the next 5 years. And there certainly can be time periods where you'll earn 0 or negative 2%, individual calendar years. We think that's kind of a normal, that shouldn't be a shock if we see that. On page 11, we'll get to the bottom line here. So for the quarter, the total fund returned 4.46%. So you're ahead of your benchmark, which was about 3.9%. For the last year, you're up 15.5%, and you beat your benchmark by about 2%. So that's a oversized amount of excess return. We generally wouldn't expect that to beat it by 2%. If you go out longer time periods, you'll see what we think might be a little more normal, 50 basis points, alpha premium, that kind of makes more sense to me over the long run. It just happens to have been a really good year this past year. So why did you have that outperformance? Sorry to jump around a little bit, but I wanted to share the bottom line before going into each asset class in greater detail. Your domestic equity portfolio was up 5.4%, and the Russell 3000 index was up 4.5%. So your portfolio did better than the broad market. That's because your active managers did such a good job for you. A couple managers that did particularly well, your growth manager, Harbor Capital Appreciation, that's sub-advised by Jennison, sorry. And Jennison has a big overweight to technology. They're almost 50% of technology stock. So that was definitely a tailwind for them for the last quarter and the last year. Your small cap growth manager, Alliance Bernstein, returned 7.7 for the quarter and almost 29% for the year. So very strong returns in small cap and small cap growth in particular. Dodge & Cox, your value manager, has had a really good quarter and year as well, up about 23% for the year. So very strong returns led to your domestic equity portfolio outperforming. And this is your largest allocation. If you look at broad asset classes, it's 38% of your portfolio. So how they do is really important to how you do overall. Your international equity portfolio on page 11, you returned 6.3%, so a little better than domestic stocks. We talked about that, currency effect and increased growth expectations in Europe. And for the year, it's up about 21%. For 3 years, international stocks are still disappointing, up only 5% for the last 3 years. And if you look at valuations across the board, US valuation is looking pretty full. Your forward-looking PEs are at almost 18. And most of the time, on average, it's about 14, 15. So it's looking pretty high. In international markets and emerging markets, they're closer to normal average valuations. Why would that be? Well, there hasn't been as much of a run-up in their stock markets as there has been in the US. And you can see that reflected in the 3-year return, up only about 5%. But that elevated PE in the US, about 17, that's one reason we don't think we can replicate these returns going forward.
Dan, I would love to see us do a press release about going over $500 million and how our numbers look over the last 7 years.
We can do that. There, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
We take so much, it would be very nice to have something positive.
Want to be careful about those kinds of things. If you start celebrating milestones, it's real easy to
Know exactly what you're saying.
see it come back.
Yeah.
So we don't want to have a $500 million party 7 times.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. But, you know,
That's something else to find.
when all you see in the journal are letters saying we should declare bankruptcy, I guess, this is a pretty impressive set of returns, even going back 7 years, which, outperforms our benchmark.
If I may, I'd steal a little bit of Greg's thunder and jump ahead to, where's my number, Greg?
Are you looking for the total fund, the ranking?
Yes, not the ranking, the long-term return number.
Oh,
I forgot what page that's on.
for the total fund, we have 13 1/4 years on page 19.
Okay, there we go.
All the time, yeah.
Yeah.
Steve,
So our longest time period over which we can reliably measure our returns, we've earned 7.73% relative to our benchmark of 7.06. That's the number that I tend to focus on because it moves around the least, if you will, and it is the long term that we like to think about. So,
and it includes the Great Recession where
Yes.
things were so bad.
Yes.
And I definitely get it, and I don't care how big or how long-term we go. It would just be nice to see a positive.
Okay. Sorry.
No, that's great. And if you look at that page on page 19, you also notice that here the green dot is you. The triangle is your index. So you've beaten your index, you're doing well with that, but it also has your peer group ranking. So you're looking pretty good relative to your peers. And part of that has to do with your heavy reliance in US equity and the equity markets in general, where some other plans have a more diversified portfolio with hedge funds or private equity or something else in there. And we've talked about this in the past. When you flip ahead to page 21, when the equity markets are up, you look really good. And when the equity markets are down, your peers look better than you. So right now, we're just at a vantage point where the equity market's gone up and you look really good relative to peers. But if you recall in 2016, when the equity markets weren't doing as well, international in particular, you did not rank as well relative to your peers. Right. So we've talked about this. You have a high beta portfolio. Your portfolio goes up and down a lot with the stock market. We did an asset allocation study and we modeled how much it could go up and down, and and you said, we're comfortable with this position and this risk that we're taking in the portfolio. But that's a bit of an explanation about the performance. So overall, it's a pretty good report card. I wanted to provide one manager update to you, and it's about the Fidelity Low Price Stock Fund. That manager historically, they changed a little bit about the way they define the securities they can buy in the portfolio. At the end of the day, we're comfortable with it, and it fits into the philosophy that they've followed historically. So let me give you a little bit of background. The Fidelity Low Price Stock Fund used to define their investable universe as any stock priced below $35, and that made it a low price stock, right? So that's how they define, okay, I'm just gonna focus my universe in here. So 80% of the securities had to have a price below $35. And that tended to put them in value stocks with a low price, and smaller companies because they tend to have a lower price as well. So it's a small cap value, mid cap value oriented fund. They recently changed the guidelines for in the mutual fund you're in to say, okay, no, we're going to define this now as we're going to have 80% of the securities in securities whose earnings yield is greater than the Russell 2000 index. So what that means is that it's how much it earns for the price of the security is above average. So a traditional value metric. So they went about doing this because that $35 price is a little arbitrary, right? What happens if it's $36, right? It's not a value stock anymore.
GE's 25 or whatever.
Exactly, that's, yeah, I'm certainly not small cap. So they changed that, and we're okay with it because we think it's just a more institutional way to define what their starting universe is. So it makes perfect sense to us. I don't have a lot of other updates for any of the your other managers on pages 10 and 11. And then what I was going to close on was some of the slides that James alluded to, slide 19. We've already taken a look at it. And performance is pretty good relative to peers, relative to the index, and a healthy absolute return in general as well.
James, Mr. Chairman, I was wanted to share with the board, as we discussed during the meeting last month during the offsite, we've started the newsletter. The second one went out just yesterday. Oops, I clicked the wrong one. That's September.
Does that go out to everybody, or, I mean, does that go out to the retirees, or?
Goes out to everyone for whom we have an email address. And you can sign up for it on our website. So anyone that wants this can get the email newsletter every month.
So you could send it to the county or to the journal or anybody that, yeah.
Yes.
So,
And James, is that, you sent notification to the AMCRE newsletter notifying the retirees of that?
Yes. Yes, I submitted an article to AMCRE for inclusion in their newsletter, and I did mention that in their newsletter as well. So I wanted to bring this up because we do have, our lead story is our investment performance, and we mentioned eclipsing the $500 million mark there. So
I think not everybody got that. You know,
Why don't you tell the board what you just told me, because I think that's real important.
one of in our department, our employees came up to me and said, what are you guys doing to our pensions? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. So there must be some bad press going around.
From what source?
That's hard to imagine.
We even got Measure B on the ballot, and some
That's true.
detention
It's-
tax.
That's true. It's getting more coverage because of that.
What I can say is with the newsletter, it is getting sent out to everyone for whom we have an email address that has not unsubscribed. So they have the ability to unsubscribe, and then we won't continue sending them. But I think largely every employee, every active employee, I'm not sure about the courts, but I know for the county, we have an email address for it.
So you sent out I think a thing to retirees to allow, or maybe AMCRE sent it out, to allow their email addresses to be,
We ask for email addresses all the time.
yeah.
We're trying to build up to send our newsletter out by email rather than paper.
So it's nothing to do with Craig, but with this.
Well, that's great.
So as a refresher, how did you get to this from the website?
So we're still not extremely happy with the website. Sorry to come back there. I'll go back to the beginning of our website.
So you're at the homepage.
At the homepage. It is under member forms and publications. And then you have to select newsletter.
Oh, there it is. There.
And it takes you to the subscription, or you can select from the archive. So,
Is that sent to us as well? I'm
I got
looking.
it. I got it.
I'm trying.
you got it because you're a member. I'm not sure.
Enroll on that
Okay, I'll
page,
just
so if you go
enroll.
back,
Okay.
you can log in and tell us what email you'd like it to go to.
Sorry, Greg.
That's all I had, unless there are questions or comments.
I have just one question. You said 40% of the recent gains are to do with the tech
Yeah.
market. Do you have any concerns, does Callan have any concerns about any kind of a bust like what happened 15, 20 years ago? Is there any concern with that?
I'm a little concerned about valuations. And so right now, for the last 2 quarters, it was the first time that we've had back-to-back quarters with 3% GDP growth in a long time. Growth is strong in the US right now. So yeah, GDP growth last quarter came in at 3 or 3.1, and that's with the hurricanes, right?
Crazy, yeah.
So very strong, and growth is picking up internationally. And I think, which is wonderful. I am a little cautious about valuations in the United States. So that 17.7 PE is a little bit above average. The only time it's been higher than that of late has been in the tech bubble. And at that time, it went into the 20s, right? So if there is a bubble, there's a long way for it to run. But it's higher than it normally is. So what do you do about that? One thing is you could try to time the market and get out. But we know that you can't really do that. And we could have timed the market and gotten out 9 months ago. And we would have missed a really big run up here. So I don't think we can time the market. The other thing you could do is just lower your expectations going forward. And to me, that's the prudent thing to do. Just know, okay, we've had quite a run up. We've had 2 years of gains in 1 year. So don't expect a lot next year. I think that's a better way to think about it. Also look for areas where things are cheap. The problem is right now there aren't a lot of areas where things are cheap. Bonds are expensive. US stocks look expensive. International isn't quite as expensive, but it's not cheap. So real estate is not cheap. So we've had years and years of a lot of liquidity in the market, a lot of being pushed by the Fed. The Fed is going to be taking some of that out. The central bank's going to be taking some of that out. So I don't think there's a great place to go to look for extra return, given where valuations are today.
Okay, hunker down.
Yeah, hunker down.
Do you have any projections for interest rates?
Not, like personally, not really, but what I can tell you is what the market is projecting. Right now, the market is predicting that Fed's fund rate in 2019 is going to be like 1.7%. The Fed governors are telling us with their dot plots that it's going to be about 2.5 to 2 3/4. So there's a big disconnect right now of what the people who control the Fed fund rate say it's going to be and what the market thinks it's going to be. I would lean closer to the Fed governors than the market. Now, having said that, the market's been right for 5 years. The Fed governors have been wrong for 5 years.
Yeah, Janet Yellen running the place.
Right, and will she? I guess Trump had some favorable comments about her today.
Well, she's out, so.
That's it.
Oh, did they say she's out
No.
today?
Yeah, he nominated somebody else that's kind of in the Yellen school, didn't he?
Did that come out today, or?
That was a few days ago, I think.
A couple days ago.
Oh, he hasn't. To my knowledge, he hasn't nominated anyone yet. He's been talking about a few people, and there's suspicion that it's this one guy
Who's kind of in her
who's
shoes.
more like Yellen and not Taylor at Stanford. But I don't think that's a done deal yet.
Hmm.
It's not a done deal, to my knowledge, unless something came up today. Anyway, there seems to be a disconnect of what the market expects and what the Fed is saying. But what's different now is the Fed is actually moving now. They've actually started increasing rates, and most people expect interest rates to go up in December one more time.
Can I ask you some questions about our investment spread? So we have 503 million in assets.
Yep.
And we had an investment return of 23.5 million. That's just over the quarter?
That's just, so over the quarter, we had an investment return of 21.5 million, yeah, for the quarter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. And that's when we, over the quarter, we had a 4.4% return.
Okay, thank you. So the fixed income would have been 4 times the 1.49%? I just divided the fixed income by its the income we received, and came up with a 1.29, so that's just for the quarter then.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So the bond portfolio returned 1.3%
In the quarter?
in the quarter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
and
Very
you
good.
may have been comparing that to the yield for a 1 year period before. Is that where you're
No, I
thinking?
was just taking the raw numbers
Oh, okay.
here. So-
Okay.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah, so all the returns are on page 10 and 11 if you ever want to take a, see what the actual experience
Oh, okay.
returns are.
Great.
Yay.
All right,
Yay.
Thank you.
thanks guys,
Thank
great
you.
to see you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you coming up.
Yep.
Sorry, fix the lump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's shocking to drive through Santa Rosa, isn't it?
You know what, I came up in the fog and it was still dark,
Oh.
so I didn't see.
I'll see a snippet on your way down.
Yeah,
Yeah,
guys,
well,
definitely
yeah.
see it going back. And I haven't been north of Petaluma since the fires. What is it, 3 or 4 weeks ago now?
Well, the north end of Santa Rosa on both sides is real
Yeah.
good into.
So the Redwood fire is,
Redwood Valley.
Redwood Valley is horrible.
how far? Is that like 10 miles up or?
Yeah, a little less.
Yeah.
Less than that.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
321 houses.
That's
So
amazing.
this area, that's a lot.
Oh my God, yeah.
It's horrible, yeah.
Yeah, it truly is. Yeah. Okay. Okay,
Thank you.
have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks again.
Yep.
Thanks for the great returns. I
Yeah.
know you did it all by yourself.
Take credit. We can't do that.
Now we're on to quarterly budget update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trustees, you have the quarterly budget update, the memo prepared by Stan, and the two schedules. I'll remind you, since it's the first quarter of the fiscal year, we only have two schedules. We don't do a year-to-date. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
No questions here?
Here's another vote to get rid of the tablet.
You can see it
I
all.
can see all right on
You can get it.
Any questions on budget update?
I can see things just.
Okay, so we'll go to this number 7, discussion and possible action regarding the board work plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trustees, I'll refer you, sent a memo discussing what my hope was that we could accomplish today. And I paired the two items here discussing an update of the current work plan, providing you additional information on everything there, plus discussion about the new projects we talked about during the offsite, and having a conversation about Milt folding new projects in and talking about projects currently on the work plan. So with that, I'm going to start by going over the work plan and updating you on where we are with that. And then we'll come back to the new projects and talk about what to do there. In terms of benefit delivery, still on track, everything's working there. The historical benefit review project, we're on track, we're chopping wood with that project, although it is very, very large. The board position elections, we're done, we've previously talked about that. The offsite, we did that. There are still two Board of Trustees positions that are up for reappointment. And that would be, I don't know the seat numbers, but it's Jerry Harris and Dan Jurdy that are both up at the end of this month, although they continue to serve until they're replaced or reappointed. So
is that going to the board or?
I believe we sent notice to the board. I know the Board of Supervisors, I believe, posted information about at least one or maybe both of the positions. So I think there may be at least one application that's been submitted, but I don't know a whole lot other than that. The 2019 legislation proposal, we haven't started anything on that yet, but that is still out there. The county is conducting the classification review, and we've been told that our positions will be in the first group of that review. So that's in process, although we have very little control or influence over that as it stands now. Moving to the second page, develop a client approval instrument. That is done. Implement client feedback monitoring, nearing completion. I can now change that to it is in process. We have started sending out surveys for new retirees to gather some information about their movement through the process. We're starting with a very, very simple 3-question survey, and we'll see how we want to tweak that going forward. So we're actually starting to gather some information now.
So the previous one, the develop client approval instrument, is that online?
Yes, this will all be online.
Right.
And it's done through the, we use MailChimp for our email communications. So we're doing a Survey Monkey and MailChimp to get the surveys from our new retirees about their experience. So it'll be automated, it'll just come to us in report form and we can see where we are. So very soon, we're looking forward to bringing back some information, hopefully. We can't force people to respond to surveys, but hopefully we'll get some feedback. Member handbook, it's still on there. There's been a little bit of work, but not as much as we would like there. Yes?
I'm sorry, but we had previously received through the website, it was a draft of explaining all the formulas, calculations for what our retirements are, and I couldn't find it anymore, but I had saved the draft. And so somebody has, well, a member had some issues about how their retirement was calculated, and I was able to go back to that document and do the calculations myself and just affirm that, yeah, what you got from the Retirement Association is correct, and it was kind of comforting.
All of that is on the website.
It is, okay.
Under Retirement System Overview and Benefits.
Okay,
You just have to scroll down to get to the examples,
great, okay,
and then there's the charts
yeah,
where you find the right multiplier.
yeah.
So
It's helpful, you know, it's great, the member direct, I love it, but it's nice if somebody has a bunch of questions to go, okay, this is how you got from point A. So thank you.
you're very welcome. We're happy to do it. Did I see another? Thought it was on hand. Okay. Back to the update on the work plan, the joint meeting. It's still on here. Client presentations, we're still doing those largely. Community presentations, still need help.
Has there been anybody reaching out to us from the Board of Supervisors for a joint meeting?
I've heard nothing.
Dan, do you know if there's anything?
No, none. I mean, we're meeting with at least 2 different boards each year, so there are other boards that want to meet with boards of supervisors. And I think the fire's kind of thrown everybody off a little bit.
A lot.
Little bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
And moving on, state-of-the-art technology, as we had discussed, the process review for the retirement process, we're just going to strike that. We don't see a need for it since we've implemented Pension Gold. We do have board tablets.
Yay, thank you.
And this one, I added the online fillable forms. I'm not sure that we had really talked about that, but that's something that we did. All of our forms are now on our website, and if you open them up as a PDF, you can enter your information, type it in, and print it out, rather than having to print it and handwrite everything in. You can still print it blank and write your information in, but for those who want to do that, we now have that option on our website. So we're going to have to find some new things under technology that we'll be working on, although we do have some ideas. Under the 100% funded, we do have the actuarial audit that will be coming soon. RFP approved. Sure, we'll go with that. It's in the packet today for your consideration, or it will be released today. And also we talked about risk assessment. That was discussed some at the offsite, but we'll need more there. And then we have a lot of things to do in the investment space that we're working on, and we'll hope to get there.
The ESG, and I think I mentioned this before, we had a really good ESG policy at CalSTRS.
Right. We will definitely not pass up that resource. So with all of that as the update of where we are today, now I want to jump back to the follow-up from the offsite. And I'm going to zoom out on this a little bit so we can kind of see the whole page. That's too far. So I organized, what I did is I took all those different projects that the trustees came up with, that we narrowed down at the end of the day during the second day of the offsite. And I started with categorizing them as needing to fall under one of our 4 objectives. The benefit delivery, fully funded by 2040, client approval, or state-of-the-art technology. And then once I had broken them down in that way, I started looking for groups that could be kind of put together. You'll see that we had 2 issues that fell under the benefit delivery objective, both performance measurement, or performance metrics, and succession planning. The disaster recovery business continuity, I put under fully funded, but it's also a benefit delivery issue. I think it falls in both places. In fact, I probably should have put it under benefit delivery more than under, that's a risk thing. It fits both. Under the fully funded objective, I came up with 4 categorization. Risk, a lot of these things fall under risk, I thought. The actuarial issues, investment, and then other. And this was anything inconsistent with fiduciary duty review. Was Jeff threw that out kind of at the end of the day of something else we may want to be thinking about.
So real Gatsby 67 report as opposed to fake Gatsby 67 report?
I struggled with that, but that's what I had in my notes and that's what I wrote down.
That's fake news.
Fake, that's
I'm looking for someone to tell me what
one we just got
we
today.
meant there.
What's a projection? The liability is a projection.
That's true.
That's what the big part.
And this is very much still in flux. If there's something that the board sees here that we think, getting away from the coast and looking at this list again, what were we thinking? We can just get rid of it, so.
But we were still virgins when we were on the coast. We hadn't had the fire. So the thing that really bounced out at me was the talking about where we have our backup, and they were what, 40 miles apart?
65 miles.
65 miles apart, and we could have everything in Ukiah versus Sonoma County or Santa Rosa and have lost all our records. And that, to me, becomes much more an immediate thing for us to look at.
So that, I don't know if that's disaster recovery, business continuity, natural disaster, risk assessment. It's kind of everything
It is
risk-ish.
very much everything risk-ish.
Just for completeness, I want to cover all of the client approval objectives. You came up with a lot in here. And I grouped these into 6 different categories. Although one item in a category, So develop a communication strategy under client objective. Outreach. So there was a lot of issues under outreach and frequently asked questions and including trustees there. Research projects. There's a lot there. We have to think long and hard about what we like there and what we don't like. because we do have very, very, very limited resources here in terms of time for staff to conduct these projects.
Seems like some of this stuff's a little bit low-hanging fruit as opposed to some of the other, would be real projects like the one-pagers. Seem like they would not be as bad as some of these other, it would not be a full-blown project, it would be something that could be accomplished, maybe within a couple of days.
There are definitely differing levels of hour commitments to the various projects.
So there's,
Every project you throw on the list, though, has got to move. If you're going to move it ahead of something, it's got to.
Makes sense.
It needs to be very, very intentional that we're going to take this on and therefore delay these projects. So
there's two in here that to me could be combined, I think one less, and that's the source of retiree benefits and retiree benefits of the economy study. So that kind of relates to the same kind of stuff.
no, I think those are very, very different in my mind.
But the fact that the feds put money into our county, then our retirees put money into our county.
Well, the sources of retirement benefits, a lot of systems, what you will see is they have some sort of pie chart or a dollar breakdown of a dollar chart. And what my recollection of this project was is how much of our retirement benefits are funded by employee contributions, how much are funded by employer contributions, and how much are funded by investment returns.
I'm sorry, I looked at the one above it, the non-local tax contributions. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
That's the one that's combinable with the economy.
Potentially.
So some of this stuff too is more money, say the Pepper impact analysis, which I think would be very helpful, or something that we should definitely look at, and that's gonna be more Siegel doing that and us just paying for it, right? That's on the one above it, it's on the one above it. It's on the strategic planning, it's on the next page up.
Oh,
Under actuarial.
okay.
I'm scrolling back and forth through all of them.
Okay.
Yeah. So like some.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So some of those, I mean, that wouldn't necessarily be an impact to the workflow here, it would just be dollars, right, that we'd have to allocate.
There's still an impact.
A lot of impact on something like that?
It really. It depends on the scope of the project that we define.
So what do you want us to do? Eventually you want us to rank these? Is that what you're thinking?
Eventually,
I mean, like today, right now?
I'd like to have discussion about it.
Okay, because it seems like almost like even if we had a way to rate them to see what the overall board's priority is, since they've been whittled down a little bit.
Well, to me, that would really be done quickly with an on-the-wall dot exercise.
Oh,
You put it on the wall, and then you talk about it. Once you've got a few categories that got a lot of dots, then you can prioritize those.
Okay.
With further discussion.
or send out a survey monkey and rate them.
Or we can send out a survey monkey and everyone rank
And the
them.
other thing is, I think it would be interesting on these to know if you had ideas of dollar amounts that it may cost
Time.
and staff time. As far as what those two things are, so that we could, because if something's gonna take an hour or two, that would be something we may move to the top of the stack and say, hey, let's get rid of this. Whereas if something was really, really time consuming, we may not choose to bring that forward because we don't feel that that's a good use of our staff resources.
There's nothing on this list that's an hour or two.
Well, to move from the broad to the
How about a day or two?
The economic study of the impact of pension benefits on the community. Why do we, what ponies in that one?
The value of retiree benefits to the community as a whole.
Yeah, what do we care?
What do we care?
Why do we spend resources?
Because everybody else is telling us we're just a burden on the taxpayers. And so if we tell them, hey, we're taxpayers, and we buy your goods and services in this community, so let's negate this negative aspect of what's talked about retirees or the retirement system with something that shows the value.
To me, that
like
would-
how many retirees were burnt out in Redwood Valley? How many employees were burnt out in Redwood Valley?
14.
But I don't see what
14
difference that
on
does to our decision-making or anything like that.
Part of
I mean,
PR.
Well, I mean, to me, it seems like two pockets in the same pair of pants. You take the money out of this pocket and you put it in the other pocket.
Look,
I
when
mean, the money
somebody,
that retirees spend in the market is money that other people would have had in their hands to spend in the market.
not well, yeah, in a way, but you know what? When everybody bitches about it, it acts like you are no benefit to the community, neither the work you do for the county or what you said you take from the county later when you weren't working, and all you get is negative stuff about it. It's nice to counteract that.
Well, maybe so, but I don't know that it's worth the spending time and, company resources to really make that argument. They just, there's lots of arguments that lots of supporting data that we can give to the community about the worth of our pension needs and the work that we do. But if it takes time and effort away from doing other things, I think that's just one good thing that you know about, you care about, but I don't know that it's how we're going to make it that argument.
I'm sure all the members care about it. I'll bet. That's a lot of people.
When I read through this list, first of all, I wasn't sure what all of the abbreviations meant because I couldn't remember. So I was trying to figure some of these out. But I think what would be helpful for me would be if James and the staff could say, these 5 make perfect sense and we feel they need to go. And they need to be on the work plan and they're not that hard. I mean, I would like your opinion too as to which ones make a lot of sense and that you think you can fit in and might be priority to you. Not that I would necessarily say that's going to be priority to the board, but I think that would be helpful in making that decision.
Okay. Looking at the list,
You have to have something you're willing to do up there, Jim.
I did compile the list, and there was no editing at all.
I bet that was it.
This was the list after we made a list of like 50 things.
Right.
Well, the board did pare that down.
Yeah.
At the end of the offsite.
We're down to 100 proof here.
I would say under the client approval objective, there are a lot of things there because of the way my brain thinks and my strengths, that I'm a strategic planning kind of person. I think the most logical project here is to develop a communication strategy first. Before we start trying to communicate, let's build a strategy of what our communications are going to look like and be. That would be my thinking. So under the client approval objective, my recommendation would be, let's do that first. And that will guide us where we want to go with these other projects.
Different than the communication policy? Or
Yes.
would you take that into consideration too?
Yes, it would take the communication policy into consideration, but this is a strategy of this is how we're going to communicate and what we're going to say and all of these things.
Well, that could lead into several of these things.
It
that
would
are on here.
naturally, I think, lead us into a lot of everything else here. But it would help guide us and do that strategically rather than, this feels like it's the most important thing to me. What does our strategy say? So that would be my thinking, looking at the client approval objectives. Under the fully funded, risk first and foremost is a huge thing. And I don't know that the county has a disaster recovery business continuity plan. We do not have our own plan. We need one. It's been started, even though it's not on the board work plan, it's on the staff work plan. And it is underway at this point. I think that's a great place to start, but we need to also be thinking about a risk assessment. And that may involve bringing someone in to help us do a full-fledged risk assessment. I've also, several other things under this risk category. We do not have an internal auditor. I would not recommend that we hire an internal auditor, but there are people that do external, internal auditing functions. That's something we could think about to help us address the risk assessment, an IT security audit, systemic review of controls kinds of issues. There would be some staff time to implement that, but then it would be an external party doing a lot of the work. There would be some work required by internal staff to do that, but that's a way we could spend some money and make it happen quicker to address some of these issues. So,
I like that.
for my money, that's where I would, the risk area, both under benefit delivery and fully funded, is where I would spend most of my time and energy right now. And not just because of the recent events, although those do highlight our need to be thinking about this.
So how does our annual audit fit into that?
Our annual audit merely looks at our financial statements. Do these accurately reflect your financial statements? The auditors do not look at internal operations. They do ask some questions, but they do not conduct an audit of operations. They do some testing, but it's limited. An internal auditor does a much different review than a financial statement auditor. All the financial statement auditors is testing is things around your financial statements and are they accurate. In my previous retirement administration, I had an internal auditor, and it was very much, there are facets of it that are testing, but then there's also facets of it that are process improvement and consulting to help make the organization better.
I just had, my understanding is that one of the number one focuses for independent audit is internal controls. Now, I don't know that our auditor, our independent auditor does that because, like, for example, our department from the county, we fill out a report for, you know, federal funding and submit it, and that's it. They never come to our department, so I don't know, you know, I think it is refreshing to maybe look for a different independent auditor as well, or maybe, you know, and maybe they could, but that's a conflict of interest. If you have an independent auditor, it would have to be a different different entity from an internal auditor on the outside, right?
Yes, I would say, I don't think it's necessarily a conflict of interest to have the same people auditing your financial statements as doing your independent audit. They would have to be separate teams. But external, internal auditing is an area of specialization. And it's not something that I would feel comfortable asking the audit team that does our financial audits to do. They just don't have the background and the expertise to do that.
I agree.
So I don't think Brown Armstrong's the right group if we want to go that road. It does involve the expenditure of funds. You know, it's not going to be cheap to do that.
Great. Actually, you just hit on a point I wanted to throw out there that, you know, it's interesting how we're defining risk. When we talk about business records and the like, that resonates with me. And I don't mean to discount the importance of the financial side of things and the accounting thereof, but I'm just wondering, and obviously we're not going to get the answer to any of this today, but as we go down this road, the cost issue, I think, is something that we need to think through as well. You know, I'll throw this out as a possibility. You know, there are various levels of review, right? You can go for a full audit, or what's the other phrase that, or level, right? A little snapshot, right? Or a review, or whatever that lower level is. That perhaps that might be you know, sufficient and something we could also look at during this process.
Absolutely. I just to kind of give some scale, if we were talking about a full external, internal audit engagement for a 3-year type term, where they start with a risk assessment, identify, and part of that risk assessment is identifying the areas where the organization has the most significant risk, and then they start reviewing those areas of risk. I think I would be shocked. Well, I don't think there's any way that 3-year contract would be less than $100,000 for over the 3 years, and it's very possible that it could be more than $100,000 a year. I don't know that, but it is a non-trivial amount of money to have that full audit review done. But it would help us move through a risk assessment and thoroughly scrubbing everything much more rapidly than what we can do with just internal resources. So it's a trade-off for the board to consider.
You know what, it's hard for me, like, for me, what you're talking about, I would need more specifics about what you're perceiving as risk for versus, because to me, internal controls are huge risk, like, that's, but I don't think you're talking about that.
It just, I mean, our financial statements auditor does look at internal controls, and they do make some recommendations on improving internal controls. But it's a lot more than that, that an internal auditor would look at. You know, when our financial statement auditor was here, they tested some number of benefit calculations. An internal auditor, rather than pulling a 1% sample or a 0.1% sample, might pull a 20% sample
Okay.
and do every single calculation over.
That's what you're, thank you. I'm not sure what you were.
Mr. Chairman. When it comes to auditors like that, there's no limit to the fairies that they can put on the head of a pin. And run the bill up to do it. I think it would be interesting to look at the history of pension plans throughout the state and beyond to see what problems have arisen, if any, and are we addressing those problems instead of inventing potential problems that are going to come up? That's just my thought.
One of the things that CalPERS provides, the California Association of Public Retirement Systems, is they give us opportunities to attend roundtable events with peers. So there's an attorneys roundtable, administrators roundtable, benefits roundtable, communications roundtable, accountants, investments, trustees even. And it's opportunities for us to go and meet with our peers and learn from each other the issues we're facing and what we're doing to deal with those. We regularly attend those. I pretty regularly go to the administrators roundtable. We pretty regularly go to the benefits roundtable, our benefits staff do. Jeff routinely goes to the attorneys roundtable, and Stan goes to accounting, and primarily the accountants, but he's, I think, maybe done, have you done investment roundtable or just the accounting? Okay. So we are having those conversations and learning from other plans. We are not the only plan facing issues in California. It's oftentimes, it's not uncommon for me to walk away from a roundtable and go, wow, thank God I don't have their problems.
Well, mature retirement plans.
But there are others that are walking away saying, wow, thank goodness I don't have Mendocino's problems. So we are learning, building a list, if you will, and thinking through all the other issues. Oftentimes we learn from the larger systems in those roundtable events. We don't have the resources or the man hours, person hours that those systems do, but we definitely try to learn and use all the resources we can. So we have that underway. I'm not aware of anyone in the CalPERS universe that uses an internal auditor. There's either an internal audit function or nothing. And that seems to be the way the world is here. And that just is what it is.
But isn't it also, we're the smallest of the 1937 Act counties, and so we obviously aren't at that position to have an internal position. So if we have the function, it almost has to be done through an external contract.
It would have to be done externally for us. But there are plenty of systems larger than us that do not have an internal audit function and do not have anything externally to fulfill that function. To some extent, the board plays some role there, reviewing plan management and everything else, because you are the ultimate backstop. The responsibility lies with you for anything that goes wrong.
So in other systems, is it maybe the county auditor controller that's providing some of those functions? I mean, is that, I'm just wondering if anyone is maybe not directly within the retirement system, but, another government agency affiliated?
I don't think so.
All right.
Everybody's limited with staffing resources,
Yeah.
so I would doubt it.
Okay.
It's possible, but I would doubt it.
I think a lot of, part of the reason to have internal audit is to have an independent set of eyes and ears reporting to the board about internal operations. For smaller organizations that don't have that, there's oftentimes a great deal of trust between the board and management. But the board still has to maintain that oversight role to make sure they're getting all the information that they need. So,
Well, aren't we really a small business? I mean, you have like $1.5 million a year budget. And the rest, we have $500 million, but it's all parked off somewhere else. We're just a management business. So, I mean, the audit stuff sounds like a big deal, but it's really a small business that we run here.
right.
And so, how many $1.5 million a year businesses require an audit? I mean, it's like, how much could somebody steal and how could they do it? And if the audit is about, gee, are we missing providing the benefits that our pensionees should be receiving? If that's the kind of audit we're talking about, just to making sure that we're not missing something, that may be a good idea. It may not, and even so, where would you find an auditor that knows more about that than you and the staff knows, with your interface with other organizations who may have, oh gee, we missed something and here's how we corrected it. So I don't know that there's independent expertise that you could buy out there that knows how to audit a pension plan versus a mortgage company. I mean, we have a full-time auditor, external, but they have a state mandated checklist of what we're supposed to do in our business, and we provide that to them, and it's kind of cut and dried. Where your business is, there are 30 or 40 of them, and so.
I like that perspective
Yeah.
of, we're like a small business. And that's,
I mean, we
in a
both
lot of
manage
ways we
hundreds
think
of
like
millions
that.
of dollars, but at the end of the day, we're a small little business.
right.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, we think like that here. We're, just as an example, we're looking at the phone system that we currently use. It's a POTS system, antiquated, not very flexible. We could potentially move to a voice over IP system, but there's issues there. So we're exploring the possibility of moving past voice over IP and going to cloud-based, which has both voice over IP plus mobile interface options. And that's, Grasshopper is the kind of the small business phone system. You may have heard ads for them before. That's one of the providers in that space, and we're thinking about that right now. Both in terms of a service provision and a risk type of thing. It's something that we're exploring, so.
Are you worried also about the IT aspect of, like hacking into our retirement system now that it's all digitalized? I mean, is that part of your scope of concern?
it is absolutely something we're aware of and we think about. There's one of the advantages of our new system, the pension gold system, is that we've contracted with a leading expert in the pension administration IT space to provide that solution and all of the security around that.
So that's,
We're still ultimately responsible there, but we've selected the best, one of the best providers we can to help us out there. It's not James and Stan and Katie and Judy and Nora trying to take care of our IT security.
right.
It's, we're paying a lot of money to have a multi-hundred person organization help us take care of my IT security, along with all their other partners.
But that
Is it
again
ever perfect? No.
is risk.
It's
Yes.
number 3,
Yeah.
IT security on it, maybe?
Yes.
And to add to that, from my perspective, a whole bunch of the things that we have listed are PR. And under PR, it seems, maybe if we need to do something to put together some one-pagers, if we can hire, I could see a small contract going out to try to give us as board members and here, the various employees a way to say, no, we're not, bankruptcy is not our answer, and someone do it up so it's online and something we can hand out. And though there's a lot of feel-good stuff, and there's a lot of trying to respond to the various attacks that we get, in my mind, that's not as critical as being sure all of our records are separated enough that we don't have a disaster situation. I would feel better under the disaster position if we had records here and then we had them
In
at
Illinois,
two other
or
places.
Indiana,
Right.
wherever they are.
Right.
But this was a real wake-up call for all of us.
Don't you have a plan at a glance document? That's what, isn't that in the pack? You've had that for a while, haven't you?
That's, I think this was something else. The plan at a glance document was, I think, something to help trustees and others address the questions that we get from the public. Aren't you going bankrupt? Aren't you killing the county?
We can't do any roads because all the
Why did
money
they take
goes-
away my health care?
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. Not the plan overview or the fact sheet, but more of the, how do I deal with the questions I keep getting from the public, is what I thought that document was.
So does that tie into the POB one-pager and the UAL one-pager and stuff? There's a lot of questions.
Could be.
there.
Those would certainly be questions probably on the, whatever that was called, the
Plan at a glance.
plan at a glance document. There it is.
Yeah.
A one-pager is probably going to go a little bit more in-depth on one specific item. So,
So looking at this list, and again, not knowing exactly what everything means, because I don't remember our 2 days of conversation. I think it's important that we help you in whatever way we can, whether it's just by picking out, maybe a survey monkey would be a good idea, to say, what are the top 3 things, that we think. We haven't even talked about succession planning, and that one
Yeah, it's
jumped out at me.
Yeah.
Or investment,
But that's
education
risky, yeah.
around local investment and so forth.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yes, succession planning to me is risk again. You know, it's critical.
Where did you find the local, oh, the investment policy?
Yeah.
And we're always doing investment stuff, so I mean, that, it seems like we're always
I
looking at
just
it. We're
wanted to
always
ask.
looking at that, yeah,
It's easy to look at.
yeah.
Is there an action item here?
Yeah.
I think it's more direction.
Well, we kind of got deep into some of the risk issues, which might just present itself as another agenda item, because they are serious and they are expensive, and I think Lee's comments are, and that's one item amongst 3 pages. So somehow we have to deal with the 3 pages. And I would just suggest you take those items that you ask staff about, to have them make a separate presentation, and we complete the strategic planning for the board on this list, and consider those staff items.
Yeah, and I still think some of this is low-hanging fruit, at least one board meeting per year on the coast. Do you wanna do it, do you not wanna do it?
Yeah.
Clippings, and we get, Richard sends us some, Tim sends us some, you send us some. I mean, in the email, that's something we get.
Yeah.
I think everybody likes that. If anybody sees anything of interest, get it to us, you know, it's like, so it still feels like this could be whittled down, maybe
Okay.
a little bit.
If the direction is, what I might suggest as some direction is some further editing to the list. And then send out a survey monkey to the board, and then we bring back those results and talk about it at a future board meeting.
Yes.
Does that?
How do you edit the list without further input from us?
Well,
Unless it's to explain some of it.
Explain or like
commingle some things.
commingle some
Like
things.
even instead of POV, 1-pager, and UAL, 1-pager, I mean, and then like what even Kathy alluded to as far as the at a glance, like put things together, make our numbers smaller that we're looking at.
So you don't have as much.
So you
So we don't have as many priorities going, oh my God, we gotta do 35 priorities.
I can do it.
Direct
Yeah,
our
well, I was gonna say-
facilitator,
That
administrator.
strategic plan for communication, those things you mentioned, might be subsets of that. I can see working on it that way. The 1-page program, the newsletter program, the dog and pony show program, it's all part of strategic communication.
Wasn't generally the next step to assign A, B, and C, and, C1, C2, C3?
That's it.
But, just prioritize. I don't have a problem with any of them, really. You just put a priority on them, and when you get around to Cs,
Yeah, and some of these do need some more,
Well,
like
I
plan
just think
sponsor
it needs to
review.
be, I
You do
agree
the
with
monkey
you.
thing.
Well, you
A,
can do it
A,
in the
B, and
monkey
C.
thing.
Ever put an A, B, and C on, that would be how the monkey would
Health of the plan
would work.
sponsor, is that what we were looking at?
Yep.
Health of the plan sponsor, yeah. I mean, and the other thing, some of these,
Done.
yeah, if we knew exactly what they were, and you may not, because we did it.
Yeah.
So I'll work on editing the list to make things clearer, potentially consolidating some projects together there to make it a manageable list, and then put together a survey monkey to ask you to prioritize or pick your top 5. Somehow we'll work through what are your top 5 projects or something.
And maybe we could pick one in each category, because I think, risk, whether it's a risk audit or whatever, risk audit, actuarial, investment, those are all important. Maybe we can rate those. And
Or if you
And then-
do it,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
If you do an A, B, and C, you only get 3 or 5 A's, you only
Right.
get so many B's.
Yeah.
And then move forward.
They're all A's.
Yeah.
Given all of this discussion and everything on your list here, is there anything currently on the work plan that you think should come off or should be moved down?
I would suggest that the work plan gets incorporated in the survey. Anything that's not in progress or not started.
Okay.
And then we could come back and talk about why they may or may not have stayed on the list.
basics or whatever.
Yeah,
It is.
it is.
I love it. Is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so anything that's not currently underway from the work plan will get added to the priority list, and you'll have to or the project list, and you'll have to reprioritize everything.
Yep, that's good. That's the way it should be done.
Yeah.
You might put an asterisk if they were already on the list or something.
Okay.
Okay, so 8 minutes after 12, let's go on to item number 8, which is retirement administrative report.
Okay. Trustees, you have the administrator's report. Let's see. Plan status document is new. That's out there. You have that. The Sackers item addressed there. Building update. Still working on a number of projects on the building.
Kudos though on the building. It really, really is looking good.
Well, you know.
Nice artwork.
Yeah, especially nice art.
That's all Judy.
We
It's
love
a good
it.
start. Oh, very good, Judy.
Office hours. We've expanded our office hours.
Was it cost effective?
The draft board meeting calendar is there for your review.
Are we gonna settle on that today, or is that, we're just throwing it out there at this point?
Throwing it out there for discussion. We typically adopt that at the December meeting.
Okay.
I did kind of include in my memo here, don't know if the board wants to consider in both May and November, we move our meetings earlier in the month. We usually end up with meetings 2 weeks apart. Do we want to consolidate those to one meeting or keep a monthly meeting and have those moved earlier in the month? Just throwing it out for consideration and discussion.
My observation is this was 2 weeks since our last meeting, and this has been our fullest meeting, so we have a lot to discuss. So it seems like we should keep them,
Okay.
but if you really don't want us to come again, I'm willing to do whatever.
So sometime in 2018.
Yes.
I noticed on the next page, you didn't change the holiday hours. November of 2016.
Oh, that was typo. Yes, it's 2017. My apologies.
It's not 22nd, is it?
It is the 22nd.
It is,
Yes.
Well, don't you take 2 days?
Well, we're officially closed the 23rd and the 24th. We're closing to the public on
Oh.
Wednesday, the 22nd.
Okay.
That's the additional closing.
If it's 2018, it's Wednesday the 21st.
Right, but it's 2017 this year.
Oh, sorry. Gotcha.
In spite of what I wrote, it is 2017.
So our recourse went down $1? Didn't it used to be $10 or?
yeah.
It used to be 10, but we have decided that Stan and I are both, should be covered. We think we're covered by the policy, but Stan and I are both going to pay part of the waiver of recourse as well, so you get to spread it over more
So
bonds.
you're picking up our part, okay.
Yes,
So what is it?
It was necessary.
I can write a check, but what is it?
$9.
What is it?
Made out,
What's it for?
This covers you
What are you
as a
spending $9
fiduciary.
for?
Yeah. Record covers me for what?
as a fiduciary for the plan. It's
your
D&O.
insurance.
It's
D&O
that,
I'm trying to
insurance.
get the recourse word out of that.
Yeah.
I don't know what the recourse means.
Kathy, it's that same
$85
insurance that I
limits
asked
of
about on the
coverage with a
foundation.
$3,000 deductible.
And the actuarial audit RFP will be released on the website later today. So,
2 questions for you. Is the plan status document, is that a public document at this point?
absolutely.
Okay, perfect. And do you need a vote on the request for proposal, or is that?
It's on the work plan as an approved project, so I don't think we need to vote on it.
And I want to say on the plan overview, I love that you put that the change of the the assumption changes
Yeah.
cause more than $100 million in unfunded liability. You've looked at where it says,
I know.
oh, I like that. I'm glad that's on there. We can put it in neon lights would be good, but.
So we have, also not on the agenda, but want to update. We do have all of your lovely pictures on the website now, having gotten Kathy done. We've also added staff photos.
Question. Can I give one of those pictures to Zachary?
We already did.
Oh, you did, thank you.
Oh,
We
did you
gave
do
them
them
a
all?
picture
Girls?
and your bio.
Oh, did you do them all?
They needed hers.
Oh, because she's on the board?
Because the.
But don't they have something they send out too that always, we're always blank in? Our county's always blank in?
No, this is like because I'm on the board
Board.
of directors and they want, the other ones all have.
That's on the roster.
Right, but the other one, there's a book that comes out with all of them and ours are all blank.
We'll get that in
They'll
February.
pull one or
We'll-
two of them
It
in,
won't be
maybe.
that way anymore.
Yeah.
We'll take care of that. We get that in February, so. That concludes my report, I believe, unless there are other questions or anything you need from me.
On the survey monkey thing, you're gonna have staff do it as well, or a separate one with the same items?
We have our own project list.
Whatever is yours is ours as well.
It's like we're married.
Our project list, our work plan follows from the board's work plan. So,
Craig?
Just under, I guess, general comments, not to keep us, but the email newsletter, love it. Folks at my office at least are getting it. So it's a good thing. Very happy to see it.
to that end, for those of you that have not seen it, there is some information in there about signing up for Member Direct for all of our members. And it mentions the fact, not in specific terms, but the Orange County case that we've talked about previously, that where some ne'er-do-wells gathered personal identifying information and tried to create retiree accounts through the retirement portals for members and then redirect funds. That is included in the newsletter.
That'll scare them
As you need to go do this because it will help protect you. So be aware of that. Creating a member direct account is the best way to do that. The information is already at LRS, and we already have a member portal. We're not going backwards. And there are a number of business necessity reasons for we're not going to go backwards. We're not going to go back to the paper days. It's just not going to happen. It's a bad idea. So this is the new reality. The best way to protect yourself is to create a member direct account.
Any other general board member items? Okay, seeing that, we're going to adjourn at 12:17.
A very long meeting.
Yeah, out at noon, very long meeting.